At Arizona State University, we've made online education better, smarter, and more personalized so you can go further in your aspiring field.
I decided to pursue medicine once I realized that ASU did have the online program for biological sciences. You're still required to learn the same curriculum. You're still being tested on the same content that anyone would be tested on in person. The comprehensiveness of the program prepared me so well for medical school.
Explore over 350 plus programs at asuonline.asu.edu. With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 350 plus undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Hold your ears, folks. It's showtime.
People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Return for the climactic clash between the forces of good and evil. Return to a galaxy far, far away. Return of the Jedi. The next chapter in the continuing Star Wars saga. The battle for freedom rages on. The heart of a hero. The courage of a rebel. The strength of a leader. The loyalty of comrades. The power of the Force. The cunning of the enemy. A destiny revealed.
Is Darth Vader my father?
A legend fulfilled. An epic of heroes, villains, and aliens from 1,000 worlds.
Eat your crap!
The quest continues. The circle closes. The saga lives on. Return of the Jedi begins May 25th at a theater in your galaxy.
Welcome to the projection booth. I'm your host, Mike White. Join me once again is Mr. Jamie Benning.
Hello, how you doing, Mike? Good to be back.
Also back in the booth is Mr. Steven Scarlatta.
Yo, thank you for having me.
Sci-Fi July continues with a look at Richard Marquand's Return of the Jedi. Released on May 23rd, 1983 in the U.S., that is. The film concludes the original Star Wars trilogy and was supposed to be followed fairly quickly by 6 or 9 other films. Instead, it was followed by 2 Ewok films and some other infrequent bones thrown to fans by Lucasfilm. From starting on Tatooine to ending by blowing up the Death Star, the film feels incredibly similar to Star Wars A New Hope, only not very good. We will be spoiling this film as much as humanly possible, so if you don't want anything ruined, please turn off the podcast and come back after you've seen the abominable special edition or any of the other futzed with versions of the film. We will still be here. So, Jamie, when was the first time you saw Return of the Jedi, and what did you think?
It was one of my very sort of formative experiences. I lived in a little town, a little village southeast of London, and on my 7th birthday in June 1983, I was taken to London by my parents, and my sister joined us, and my auntie and uncle and my cousins joined us as well. And we went to Hamley's, the big toy store, and I was spoiled rotten. I think I got like Snow Speeder and an AT-AT and Bib Fortuna. And I remember looking at those card backs with the blacked out Ewoks and all of that stuff. And then with these giant bags, we went to see Return of the Jedi at the Dominion, which I think was one of the biggest screens in the UK at the time, on 70mm. I even remember there was a Weetabix advert beforehand. I loved it. I loved the whole experience. And I have an affection for this film, which I think we're going to tear down in the next hour or so. But I do have an affection for the film because it was the first time I think I properly realized that films were made, if that makes sense, that there were these names attached to the film. Yes, there was George Lucas, but there was Ken Ralston and Phil Tippett and all of those guys, because my sister at the time bought a behind-the-scenes book. I bought the storybook in the foyer after the film. My parents had, pence left to spare after the Hamley's trip, and they let me buy that book. And on the train, my sister and I swapped books, and I was looking through this thing going, wow, matte paintings and compositing and model making and all this stuff. And that's when I think that sort of jump-started my love of behind-the-scenes movies.
And Stephen, how about yourself?
Yeah, I first saw it in the theater. I was a huge Star Wars fan when it came out. I was 10 when it came out. I vaguely remember seeing the first one and mostly remember Empire, waiting in a lobby to see it more than the actual movie. But when Return was coming out, I was excited. I was at the right age. I had the Marvel comic that had the entire movie in it. It took me a month to finally see it because every time we went to the theater, it was sold out or the line was around the corner. And my family was like, no way, we're going to sit online for like 3 hours for you to see this thing. So it took like a month. And it was hard waiting to go see that movie. It's so funny. Like maybe when the first Avengers came out, the Marvel movie, I remember seeing it opening weekend and just being like, damn, we're so spoiled today that we could see a big movie opening weekend. I saw Wolverine last year, like on a Sunday morning at 8 a.m, opening weekend. But when Jedi came out, dude, you could not get into that theater. You couldn't. And so it was the wait when the movie was out to finally get a chance to get into the theater. I think my dad found some theater that he heard about that doesn't have long lines. And that's how I finally got to see it. Yeah, and I loved it. I was the right age for it, and I ate it all up, man, with a knife and fork, man. I loved it at the time. But throughout the years, it became the one I watched the least. And then when I got into film school, when I rediscovered Star Wars when I was in film school is when I came to realization, Empire is my favorite and probably one of the best movies ever made. And so, yeah, it was interesting returning back to Jedi for this podcast.
I think I saw it maybe opening weekend. Sorry, Stephen. I don't want to rub that in your face or anything. And
I'd let you cue, yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't remember how I got to see it, but I remember it was me. It wasn't my folks. I don't think, maybe they just dropped me off or something. I don't remember being there with my folks at all, but yeah, I remember the movie theater. It was the Southgate Theater that eventually became an AMC, which is eventually now part of the Myers parking lot. Myers Thrifty Acres for folks that are outside of Michigan. It's a chain around here. And yeah, I was 11. So right around that same time. And I don't know what it was. Like, I think when I saw it initially, I was stoked. But even watching it the very first time, I was like, oh, they're just doing another Death Star? Why? And the biggest thing for me was Boba Fett. When Boba Fett died, and just because I had fallen in love with that character from seeing, the Star Wars Holiday Special, seeing Empire Strikes Back, the whole thing of Han Solo being frozen. I was just so, like, what's going on? And I had this headcanon of when Lando reaches down and like checks the vitals, I was like, oh, he's actually setting it to like defrost in a few hours or something. So Han is going to like wake up in the back of Slave One and kill Boba Fett or have a huge fight or something. And I just had it all built up in my head as being like, oh, this is going to be the best thing ever. And then when he just died in such a cartoonish way of like just dispatch within 30 seconds. And I was like, why is he even sticking around at Jabba's palace? Like, he dropped off the prize. He should be out getting more money. Bounty hunters don't make any money standing around Jabba's palace, is what I think anyway. It's not like he's on commission or something, but yeah. So I don't know. I don't know how soon after, because I know I had plenty of action figures. I had a lot of Ewok action figures, a lot of those monsters that were on Jabba's barge,
Rada.
Nikto. Yeah. Had those guys, had a lot of stuff.
Lando in skiff guard disguise with the little helmet. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Oh, dude, that was my favorite. Yeah.
that was a great figure, yeah.
Mine was Bosch. I loved.
Yeah, another helmet.
Helmets.
You know what, Mike, is about, you know, like if you compare anything to The Empire Strikes Back, you're going to struggle, right? So imagine if Empire had been a really shitty movie. The Jedi would probably be revered today because it would have been a return to form and it would have been back to the formula and the stuff that we love and all that kind of thing. But when you put it up against Empire, it really is a very, very different film. I remember when I sort of rediscovered the trilogy when I was probably about 14 or 15, I think it had come out on VHS. And my mum was like, you really want that for your birthday? Aren't you a bit old for that kind of stuff? And I remember watching Empire for the first time in quite a few years and just thinking, because I knew Jedi more because I had it on tape from TV, I think. And Empire, I was like, wow, there's so much dialogue and there's so much character development. And, you know, compared to Return of the Jedi, which as my then 8-year-old daughter, when we watched it a few years ago, said to me, it's just a series of set pieces put together. That's kind of what Return of the Jedi is. You know, you've got the opening and you've got the sail barge and then you've got the Yoda scenes and then you've got the Death Star stuff. And that's kind of it. But it does suffer, I think, because of that comparison to Empire.
I was thinking, like, is it like a Halloween 3 thing? Like, when Empire came out, was it not liked as much? But throughout the years, it just gained more fandom.
I think a lot of people were kind of pissed off at the ending, weren't they? That it was like such a downbeat ending. You know, you think about Star Wars, it's all tied up in a bow, all right, Vader's going off and maybe he's going to be in a sequel kind of thing. But when you get to Empire, it's very dark, you know, it doesn't have a proper ending for people. It isn't like the bubblegum movie that the first one was. Yeah, it's interesting to try and remember how they were perceived in sort of isolation, those 3 films. But yeah, I think like you, Stephen, as well, over the years, watching back, even though I have an affection for Return of the Jedi, like I said at the top, I do know it is the worst of the 3 by some way. You know, it's actually quite poorly made in places. There's some really badly focused shots. There's some pretty dodgy editing of sound under explosions, and music editing is also a little bit wonky in places. You just don't see that in the other 2 as much. But yeah, I still love it. I don't know.
Well, it's all good, man.
The first movie felt like it was so poured over. You know, you had even like Brian De Palma helping rewrite the opening scroll and the re-edit and Marsha having her hand in there. And it probably didn't help that the marriage was kind of on the rocks around this time. So she's probably not as involved as she was with the previous films. I think that's kind of a down thing. Also not having, you know, it's just George writing and then Kasdan coming in and cleaning things up. He doesn't have a Lee Brackett to bounce stuff off of either. I mean, it's just like, I don't know, it just felt like it was missing things. And just having like Marquand there. And I mean, Lucas just admitting, like, I wanted a director that I could control. Basically, he's directing by proxy through poor Richard Marquand. I always felt bad for that guy. The story is better than the reality. The story that David Lynch tells about being approached to direct Return of the Jedi and just the thoughts of what Return of the Jedi could have been, you know, if Dune didn't happen and he directed this instead.
I was asked by George to come up to see him and talk to him about directing, which would be the 3rd Star Wars. And I had next door to 0 interest. But I always admired George. You know, George is a guy that does what he loves, and I do what I love. The difference is what George loves makes hundreds of billions of dollars.
That would have been wild, but I can't imagine Lynch and Lucas's sensibilities getting on whatsoever. But hey, the sound editing would have been fantastic, that's for sure.
I don't want to be down on any of the sound editors, but that whole Lynch thing, you know, he talks about being offered the film and being with George and then being taken upstairs and there's all these drawings and he's like getting this headache and it's getting worse and worse. In a way, I could sort of imagine Lynch doing Empire more than Jedi, because Empire is the kind of weird, spookier film. It's got some pretty abstract ideas, you know, with the dream sequence and all of that stuff. And maybe, you know, if he'd left Lynch alone, like he left Kirsch alone to do it, but maybe he would have a very, very, very different Empire. But Return of the Jedi, I think Lynch probably made the right decision, didn't he?
Oh, yeah, 100%. I just loved his little quote. He was like, because it was a George's film, he already designed these little bears and had all this stuff done, and he wouldn't have had control. And I think you could just see more of him in Dune versus we'll ever see it in Return of the Jedi. And we would never got Blue Velvet as like Dino's apology in a way. I don't think Lucas is going to give David Lynch an apology movie after what he puts him through for Jedi.
It's a real shame that, Marquand didn't live longer, because it would have been interesting to hear his take on it. There's very little of him talking about the movie. I remember when I was making my Returning to Jedi filmmumentary that I dug around for stuff. And at the time, when was that, 2008, something like that, there wasn't much around on YouTube of him talking. There's a few magazine interviews. He did want to do the best job he could. But I think, as you said, Mike, that, he was employed because he was a fast and efficient director. He'd made The Eye of the Needle, I think, was the film that Lucas saw that kind of attracted him. And he found it like really efficient, and it moved, and it was kinetic, and it was always like moving along. Every scene was there for a reason, and he needed somebody that wouldn't be there, going over schedule and going over budget. But yeah, I would love to hear his answers to a lot of the questions that have been raised about, was he a puppet at the time? Because some people you speak to who are on the set, they said, no, he was very diligent. He had it all in control. He made a lot of the suggestions, including the Boosh stuff and, Jabba being there as a prisoner and all of that kind of thing. So maybe he had more say in the film than we realize.
I believe he had a say in bringing in Anakin at the ending as a ghost. I thought I read that.
I think that might be right. Yeah.
Which version of Anakin?
Oh my goodness.
I always think like Luke is going to look over at the end of that special edition and see Hayden Christensen there and go, who the fuck is that?
Who's this guy? I mean, I kind of get why they did it. It really annoyed me at the time. But now so much time has passed with the prequels existing in the world. I've come to accept that they're not for me, then they're for another generation. And, when Anakin turned up again in some of the TV stuff in the last couple of years, I think it was in Ahsoka, I can imagine they were very excited, those fans. And, I can't take that away from them. But at the time, I was like, why are you changing this movie? Some of those special edition changes I do not like.
I went last year to like the 40th anniversary screening. They had it like over here at the Cinemark on the XD screen, like their rip-off IMAX. And I just remember sitting down at first. I was really excited to rewatch it because like some of my favorite moments in Star Wars are in Return of the Jedi. That's why I appreciate the movie. But man, when they're at Jabba's palace and that new musical number starts.
Oh, good Lord.
Oh my God, it was excruciating. And then you guys shared with me the original cut, which I watched, and I had more appreciation of that. And I was so happy not to experience that sequence again. And the Sarlacc pit putting in like the mouth. It was just like watching it in the theater. I was so bummed by it. I was like, dude, this is brutal. And then the effects don't hold up as much either in the special edition, unfortunately. But watching the version without all that is really good, though.
I think the thing is, when you see those movies, you want to be reminded of the time that they were made, that they are a product of that time, right? Next week on the 12th, or this week, sorry, on the 12th, they're showing at the BFI here, the British Film Institute, they're showing the original 1977 Star Wars dye transfer print in stereo, and it's been sitting in the archives for decades.
I'm amazed they're allowed to show that.
I believe it's gone to the very, very top. I won't say any more than that, but I think because the particular festival it's on is the Film on Film Festival, which is about showing celluloid. They've got the Twin Peaks pilot without the weird European cuts on as well. They've got a couple of nitrate prints there of older movies, but Star Wars is the kind of opening night thing. They're doing 2 screenings of it. And yeah, it's amazing that it's happening, because even at the TCM festival a couple of weeks back over in the States, the Empire Strikes Back that was shown with George, there was the special edition again. You've got this one arm of George and his endeavors to push everything into the digital era from the start. But now I think a lot of these filmmakers are getting to that point in their career where they're looking back to their origins and kind of accepting their work to a certain extent. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. Apparently somebody quite high up is coming to announce the film or present the film in London. So yeah, I'll fill you in on who that is, but that should be interesting.
Oh, wow. That's amazing, because I don't think I've ever seen those versions since VHS or anything. Because this return version, I haven't seen it in years. This was the first time rewatching it like this, because I hate Lando breaks the fourth wall when he has to lower his helmet thing. Yeah. But all the singers, when they're singing the gibberish, it's just they're singing it into the frame.
The camera, and
that's where
and the tonsils in the back of the throat of that main singer is just like, ouch. It just that, yeah, you're right. That stuff doesn't fit. But I kind of see those special editions in a way as an exercise to kind of prove that the prequels could be made. Could we make digital environments? Could we make digital characters? And also to fund that as well, because I mean, they made a heck load of money back in, 97? So I can see that as a kind of a stepping stone. But, I'm fortunate enough to own the originals in some format. And I think I was around for the trilogy screening at Elstree Studios, or the cinema that used to be opposite Elstree Studios in the early 90s. It was the last time the original prints were shown before they were all gathered up. Then the special editions were going to be, I think it was like 92 maybe. So yeah, I'm excited to see it all these years later. Yeah, it would be interesting. But Jedi, I mean, the only thing that really is miraculous about that special edition is that Femi Taylor, who plays Ula, the green dancer, looks exactly the same, 20 years on.
While I was doing my research for this, I found there's a whole fetish community around Ula. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
But there's like subreddits and things just dedicated to her. Lots of, what's that rule when something can be sexualized on the internet? Like, she definitely gets sexualized. And I think like her popularity is what really spurned the Ahsoka character, because I don't think that Ahsoka would be Ahsoka without Ula.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, the original Return of the Jedi had a few frames taken out of it for the special edition, because when she falls into the Rancor pit, there is a bit of a moment where her boob pops out, and they shaved off like 2 or 3 frames there, I remember, for the special edition. Not that I went looking, but I just heard that.
But yeah, you're right. It is just like such the series of set pieces. I mean, the whole thing at Jabba's palace, I mean, that takes up so long. Why didn't they tell C-3PO what was going on? Why is he so fucking clueless? Like, he feels like Marcus and Sala in The Last Crusade, where these really competent characters from the earlier films suddenly turn into complete morons. And it just feels like he's a moron through this entire movie. And like, we talked about his character in the first movie when we talked about Episode 4, A New Hope, which I still hate calling it that. When we talked about Star Wars, that was the name of the movie. When we talked about Star Wars, we talked about how George wanted him characterized like a used car salesman. And that was there in that movie, and I could see it in the second movie as well. But there's no subterfuge at all in this film. He just, I can't tell a lie. I can't tell these people I'm a god. And I'm just like, haven't you watched Ghostbusters? No, I guess not, because Ghostbusters was 84. This was 83.
Ray, when someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes.
But he just feels so stupid in this movie, and constantly like, what did I do? Oh, and like, all the slapstickiness, and especially around him, like getting smacked by Jabba, falling off the skiff, like all of these things where it's just like, what happened to this character? It just, you're undermining yourself.
And the same thing happens to Harrison Ford as Han Solo as well. He just turns into this doofus as well. He's just like, what's going on? Oh, I hit Boba Fett. Oh, hang on, what, your brother, sister, what?
Come on, tell me, what's going on?
I can't tell you.
Could you tell Luke? Is that who you could tell?
I'm always taken out of a movie if kind of rules have been set and then suddenly a character does something purely for a little kind of story point that doesn't fit their character. And I feel Return of the Jedi, if you refer to the other 2 movies, some of the dialogue that comes out of those characters' mouths in that movie, or some of their actions, just really don't fit with what you understand about them. Yeah, that whole thing at the start with Jabba the Hutt, I love it. I love Jabba the Hutt because when I first saw him on screen, I was like, well, what is that thing? This is amazing. And I'm fortunate to call Dave Barkley, one of the puppeteers, a friend, and Toby Philpott as well. And I've interviewed those guys a few times and found out all the details about that. I'm far more interested in Return of the Jedi behind the scenes than I am actually of the movie itself, since maybe I was 15 or something like that. But I still have an affection for those scenes, but they really don't make much sense. The hologram, like, why is he doing that with a hologram? Because he's coming anyway. Is it like multiple attempts to do what? So Leia's there, she's dressed up, she's got Chewie. So now Chewie's captured. Oh, and Han Solo's been released. Now he's captured and Leia's captured. So is Luke going to come anyway? Or is Luke late to the party? But hang on, he did the hologram message. it just doesn't gel. But these things didn't occur to me until I was in my 20s, probably. I just used to sit there and just love all the hardware and the character moments and all of that stuff. So I don't know. I've become cynical in my old age.
The Jabba stuff is still some of my favorite things in a Star Wars film, but you're right. Watching it this time, I didn't realize how long it keeps going. You just keep introducing characters and it just goes and goes and goes until Luke comes in. And I guess it's due to like so many rewrites they were doing so fast on the movie that it's very off. And like you were saying, just like all the characters are off. I don't buy, like you said, 100% with Han Solo. It's not Han Solo. I don't know if it's the Carbonite or whatever the hell. He's so much softer in this movie. He's not the Han Solo from Empire, and Darth Vader's not the Darth Vader from Empire. I don't really feel like Luke, I guess his development has to be stronger in this movie, but when he's lurking around Jabba and then threatening him and everything, I don't even buy his threats to Jabba. There's just something really off with the characters, period. And I think Leia's just there. And I guess mostly because in the original draft, she was already supposed to be on Endor throughout the whole first act. And then they were, with all the rewrites, they're like, oh, now she's going to just appear here. And I guess that's why she has nothing to do until she strangles Jabba. But it is kind of a mess watching it this time because you guys give me so much stuff to read and watch. And then it made me think even more about it. Like, oh my God, this movie is really a mess. I didn't realize.
There's a bit in From Star Wars to Jedi, the making of a saga, the big long documentary they released around the time of Return of Jedi was released, where Richard Marquand is there looking very officious with it. He's got his clipboard and he's obviously got like script or storyboard on it. And Harrison Ford says, okay, I'll try and say it without moving my mouth in case you choose not to use it. So I got the feeling, like you were just talking, Stephen, that the rewrites were happening sort of on the fly and they were having to shoot alternate scenes potentially, or just always have in mind that something might not be used or could be used in a different way. And there's also a bit where Mark stood there in Jabba's palace again with Richard Marquand, and the energy between them is really weird. I think he says like, oh, Jabba's becoming a really big star now. And Mark Hamill says, oh, is he? Or, something like that. There's just this weird moment where you think these two are not connecting. I don't know what it is. I don't think I've ever heard Mark Hamill talk about Richard directly. And I've dug through, as you know, many, many interviews over the years. I might be wrong. There might be something out there. But it just felt like there might have been a little tension on set because, of course, this was a massive, massive movie and the expectation was high. The budget was pretty huge for the time. But again, it was, George throwing a lot of his own money in as well. So just some of those behind the scenes bits, it just feels a little bit more clunky than it should have been or could have been.
Going back to what you guys were talking about originally with Empire, going off what you're saying, Jamie, it's like, I think that's why this movie is so nice, is because like he knows this is wrapping up with this one. And he knows the next few things are going to be Ewok movies and the droid cartoon. He's trying to play it as safe as possible with this movie. It's got to be a success. It's huge and everything has to be played safe. He can't make another dark sequel. And I think that's why it is what it is. And like what Mike was saying, it's like, everything is a callback to Star Wars in this, it's like the opening is the same as the opening of Star Wars with Underneath the Star Destroyer. And, and some of the stuff you guys gave me where it's like Jabba's palace is the cantina scene all over again. It's like another assault on a Death Star, another whole planning scene about the Death Star. It's like we've pretty much another Yoda scene. Yoda originally wasn't in this, but the director wanted Yoda in it. It's like everything we've seen before from the previous movie. It's like trying to remind you, like, oh yeah, you love that original movie. We're going to start again on the desert planet we were already at in the first one.
It's interesting to hear some Mark Hamill interviews where he was sort of talking about knowing what he knew from Empire and the success of that, or the relative success of that, and the way the film and the characters were going. I think he said something like, in Return of the Jedi, I thought I was going to have this mohawk and I was going to be like turned to the dark side, and like nobody can believe that I've been turned, and then the last minute I kind of saved them and all this kind of stuff. And I think he said jokingly, I think it was on a Kevin Smith round table thing some years ago, he said, I thought Boba Fett was going to take the helmet off and it was going to be my mother. And, he was looking for all of this sort of mysterious stuff that had all been kind of lined up, and he wanted it to be answered in some way and to continue going in that dark direction. But I think you're right. George just wanted to make sure that it was a profit. He wanted to get it done. I think he was probably exhausted by this time. Like you said, the divorce with Marcia was going through at the time. And it just feels like, yeah, we know the formula. Let's just do that with a few new toys thrown in.
Even when you look at the scene of Leia talking with Wicket, it's basically when Luke is talking to R2 in the swamps, or like him meeting Yoda, kind of, but Wicket doesn't speak English. So it's almost the exact same thing where Leia's doing this now.
Well, looks like I'm stuck here. Trouble is, I don't know where here is.
Now all I gotta do is find this Yoda. If he even exists.
Come on, sit down. You want something to eat?
This place gives me the creeps. I feel like...
Feel like what?
Like we're being watched.
Oh, wait, put your weapon. I mean you no harm.
I promise I won't hurt you. Now come here.
The first movie feels like Luke's movie, right? The second movie could be Luke or it could be Han's movie because they're both equally very important. And then it comes to the third movie and I'm like, well, whose movie is this? It doesn't feel like anybody's movie at this point.
It's like Vader or the Emperor's movie in a way. They're the sort of biggest character.
Exactly. And I guess it's supposed to be Anakin's redemption, but at the same time, he's been a villain for 2 films, very vicious villain. And yet now suddenly we're supposed to see good in him. And I'm like, I don't see what you're seeing, Luke. And Luke's whole development feels like it takes place between these 2 movies, because when he shows up, it's like, okay, to your point, he's making all these threats. I don't feel like he's a badass. I don't feel like he's any sort of threat to Jabba whatsoever. I had read while I was doing my research. So first I read it and then I saw it. So when I read it, it was, oh yeah, the movie was supposed to start with Luke building his lightsaber. And when the beam comes out, it's green. So we don't know, is he good? Is he bad? Because we've seen blue versus red. We've never seen a green lightsaber before. We don't know what this guy's doing. And so I was like, oh, that's cool. Like, throw us off the scent a little bit here at the beginning and kind of do that thing that you were talking about where it's like, oh, maybe he's turned to the dark side. You know, he left his training too early, all these things. And then I finally saw that scene. I didn't think it was actually shot, but then I saw it where you see it's just a connector between Darth Vader at the beginning talking to Jar Jar, that Imperial dude. And then we transition to Tatooine and you see Luke working on the lightsaber. You see he's in a cave and you've got R2 sitting across from him. You've got 3PO in the back outside. And it goes basically right into them leaving and going to Jabba's palace. So you don't get the sense that Luke has turned at all. There's nothing there. It's just like, oh yeah, he's working on a lightsaber. Okay, cool. You know, and then that even like had they kept that scene in there, it would have just added more to the confusion as far as why is he showing this hologram? Like, we know he's here. We know he's on Tatooine.
He feels too invincible also in this movie. You know, I don't know what his plan was if R2 wasn't there to give him the lightsaber. First, he goes for the gun. It doesn't work. And that's the only time you see him kind of vulnerable is the Rancor scene. Because every other scene, he's just kind of invincible. It's very odd. You know, I'm never fearing for him at all or anything. When you see Darth Vader, not as himself, like Jamie has that phenomenal film documentary you sent me and I watched and I was blown away by it. There's a sequence in there where Vader's choking out someone. And I'm like, yeah, that's what's missing from this movie is Vader choking motherfuckers out because you were threatened by him. He's so scary in Empire. He's choking everyone out. That's just missing from this movie. I guess they have to soften him so when he turns at the ending. And the whole, like, everyone, I guess, was expecting was Luke's battle with the dark side. It's only in that one scene when Vader pisses him off when he talks about his sister. That's the only kind of time you see it, but that's not at all in this movie. You don't really get a lot of that. It's something they teased with Daisy Ridley's character, that last trilogy, and never went through with it at all either. That's like they always set it up, but then they just kind of back away from it. And by the way, you are also right about that Wicked scene. I never thought about it, that it's totally mirroring Luke and Yoda. You nailed that.
There's something about Luke in this. It feels like they wanted to paint him as getting above his station too early. Like Yoda laughs at him. So certain are you, he says, about being a Jedi and that. And then Harrison Ford, or Han Solo, I should say, has that line, which again doesn't fit his character. I've been out of it for a little while and everybody gets delusions of grandeur. That's not a Han Solo line. It felt like they wanted to kind of say that Luke is kind of going too early and it's too risky and it's too dangerous and he could turn to the dark side, but it isn't really developed enough for us to kind of feel that danger until that very last moment, like you said, where Vader kind of pisses him off and he gets a bit angry and whatnot, and then it culminates with him throwing the lightsaber away. I feel if they'd have built that up a little bit more, that Luke was just getting a bit too carried away too quickly, the quick and easy path and all of that stuff, maybe mirroring some of those threats, those dangers that Yoda talks about in Empire, it would have felt like he had more of an arc through the movie. I just don't buy where he is or what he's doing for most of.
I don't want to be this guy, but I don't need to see every scene of connection materials, yada, yada. But it always feels, and this is such a minor quibble, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. It always feels to me like the scene where he turns himself into the Imperial Guards and they bring him to Vader. Not seeing him turn himself in is a missing opportunity to see how he would handle himself in that type of situation. I want to see that. I don't care about him hanging out with the Ewoks and all that kind of stuff. I almost want him to, leave the story a little bit earlier and separate out, because we see them separate right after the whole Jabba skiff thing where, the Falcon goes right and the X-Wing goes left. And thank God he showed up at Dagobah when he did, because if it was 15 minutes later, Yoda would be dead.
Again, it feels like the writing is inefficient in a way. It doesn't ring true like it does, particularly in Empire and also in Star Wars. But yeah, you're right. If he hadn't have turned up, he would have just got one little croak 10 minutes later and that would have been it for Yoda. But again, it doesn't feel like Luke is stripped of anything at that point. Like when Obi-Wan dies in Star Wars, you kind of go, oh shit, he's on his own here. Like he's just met this guy and he's his mentor and he was going to teach him what's going to happen now. Okay, they're escaping the Death Star. But when Yoda dies, I think he has that moment, doesn't he, where he says to R2, I don't think I can do it. I can't do it alone. Then Ben Kenobi arrives. That's a whole other thing. But I don't feel his vulnerability at that point as much as I did when Obi-Wan died. I still love this movie.
Oh, no, it's all good.
I'm not trying to call you a moron for liking this movie.
No, not at all. I just, it is one of my favorite movies still because it's dumb and it's part of my childhood. But, when you're a kid, these things pass you by, all these little plot points and things and character changes and things that don't feel right in the character. But it's not until you get older where you start picking it apart. But you never hear people do this with Empire.
Just all the stars aligned for Empire to make it perfect. Lawrence Kasdan, the director, taking more control because Lucas was so overwhelmed by everything. And
the DOP as well. I mean, Peter Sushitsky looks amazing, Empire.
Kurtz, the other producer, Kurtz, I think he got a different producer for this one, which Lucas had his hands all in this one for sure versus Empire. And not saying Lucas is, incredible, but I think there was just all these elements in that. And then I think it was also that Kasdan had Kirshner's back more. And then when it comes time for this movie, everything Kasdan wants to do, Lucas is like, nope. Because Kasdan's more in a frame of mind of Empire. He wants to kill off characters. He wants to kill someone off during the Jabba scene. So the stakes are high.
Well, hell, Harrison Ford was first in line. He's like, yeah, kill off my character, please. It was funny because what was the new Star Wars movie he was in where he died? Was that
Force Awakens?
Force Awakens.
Yeah. And I remember right before the movie came out, I tweeted, because it was still Twitter back then, I tweeted, oh, I really like the new Star Wars movie. It's such a shame that Han Solo dies. And people were out for me for blood. And I was just like, I didn't know that he actually died in the movie. I was just taking a guess because I was like, he's been wanting to be dead since 1983. He wanted to die in this movie. And kill this character off. I mean, I love Han Solo, but would have really raised those stakes. Holy shit.
Yeah, I had that same guess. I remember saying to my wife, that's the only reason Harrison's going to have returned to this movie, because he wants to be killed off. Yeah, because there was another version of the script as well where that blast is chasing them out of the Death Star, and there's that little second, have they perished? Or, oh no, here's the Falcon and the X-Wings and stuff. They were going to actually get rid of Lando at that point as well in one version of the script. And again, it would have felt like, the stakes were raised. Like, when you take away a main character, you really do feel the peril for everybody else. You think, well, anything can happen now. But yeah, it's just played so safely. But, you know, the other thing I was saying about Peter Suschitzky's, it was the DOP on Empire. You know, that film looks amazing to this day. I saw it in the cinema again. It was a special edition, the least heinous, I guess, a couple of years ago. And me and my mate turned to each other at the end and we said exactly the same thing. We said, wow, it still works, doesn't it? That movie, you know, it still really looks amazing. You look at Jedi, it has a really sort of flat look to it. Alan Hume was the DOP. You know, he worked on some of the Bonds later on, but he worked on the Carry On movies and, you know, he was a British DOP and it has a very sort of fake look to it, I think, Return of the Jedi.
It's not surprising that you said James Bond, because I actually had James Bond in mind. Maybe it's because I've been doing the Rankin' on Bond podcast, but I really had James Bond in mind as far as those set pieces, and especially some of the set pieces that go, in my opinion, on for too long. I like the idea of the speeder chase through the forest, Moon of Endor. I really like that, and I like the way they shot it. It just feels like it goes on for a little too long, kind of like a lot of James Bond chases do. But again, I think I was probably right there with you, Jamie, as far as watching everything I could get my hands on around the making of this film. And I did the same thing for Empire. I did the same thing for Star Wars, because back in those days, you didn't have the internet. You couldn't go watch this YouTube special or something. And if you didn't see it on PBS or on Nickelodeon or any of these kind of channels, you just didn't see it. But if you recorded it and you could just watch like over and over again, like how did they do this Sarlacc pit thing? How did they do the speeder bike? So seeing the speeder bike sequence taken apart and showing like, oh, here's where it's stop motion and here's how we did the speed of this. And then having, who's it, Ben Burt come in and talk about the sound effects. I mean, the sound effects themselves in this movie. And that's, to me, kind of one of the funniest parts of the film is when C-3PO is telling the story of Star Wars to the Ewoks, and it's all through the use of sound effects. And I'm like, yes, like these sound effects are classic. The whole cranking of that, the AT-ATs and everything. And it's just like, oh, this is so cool. But of course, when I'm watching that now, I'm just like, oh, this reminds me of that scene in Reign of Fire where Christian Bale is and Gerard Butler when they're reenacting Star Wars. And I'm just like, yeah, Star Wars is this classic tale. Like it is the mythology of our times. And like, it's so funny because, yeah, like, and then like you're saying, we went real dark with the second one, the third one, just playing it so safe. And just, it felt like it was just such a kiddie movie, you know, like having the Ewoks in there, having the teddy bears, having the slapstick, having like, oh my God, having fucking Chewbacca do a Tarzan yell as he's swinging over. And I'm like, oh man. And it was so funny because at the same time as I was listening to a recording of just Return of the Jedi, the soundtrack, basically, I flipped over and I was listening to We Hate Movies talking about Revenge of the Sith. And they're like, oh yeah, Chewbacca does a Tarzan yell. And I was like, oh God, that sounds so awful. And then I listened to Return of the Jedi and he does it again. I was like, oh fuck. Or he did it the first time, I should say.
Yeah. There's also that bit with the speeder bike when the Scout Trooper, I love that design, by the way, the Scout Trooper.
Oh, I'm with you.
And the speeder bikes. That was Nilo Rodis Jamiro, who, again, I'm happy to say is a friend of mine. He's actually sending me something very cool this week. Just a quick little aside. I've interviewed him 3 times now and we've become quite chatty on WhatsApp. And he sent me a load of drawings that he did, original drawings for me of his iconic designs. One is a Scout Trooper. But Regal Robot have been doing these reproductions of maquettes of the characters that you see in that documentary where they're all on the table.
Oh, wow.
And he made the design of this thing called the Yuzum, which I think is the guy that sings in the special edition, but originally is just in Jabba's palace, like leaning up against the wall. It's this little guy with like little pipe cleaner arms and a fuzzy kind of body. He was sent one of them by Regal Robot and he's like, I don't want it. I'm sending it to you, Jamie. So I'm getting that in the post this week, which should be fun.
I noticed him too during that making of, just when Mike sent it to us. And I was like, oh, he was a character I didn't know he was a character until the special edition. But keep going. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And Nilo said to me that because he did some little sketch cards to go with this model. And he said, I got through like half a dozen of these drawings. Then I realized I was bored. And that's why we didn't develop that character, because it was a dumb character. It was a dumb design. So I'm getting it. But the point I was going to make was about the Scout Troopers was, there's that bit where one of them has the front end chopped off with Luke's lightsaber and it goes... It's like this really, really sort of cartoony whistling sound as it spins round. And that feels very non-Star Wars, like Bemba, of course, as we know, went out and gathered all of these organic sounds. And I think that speeder bike sound was when he heard like a jackhammer in the road and the air hose got a stone in it. And he was like, wait there. And he ran off and got his recorder and recorded that sound for the speeder bikes.
That's incredible.
A lot of these organic sort of grounded real world sounds. And then when you hear the Tarzan call and the spinning speeder bike, it just feels like we're in a Tex Avery kind of environment.
It gets silly, man. The movie just gets silly. That's all. I mean, because it was for kids. Because I was thinking about the third Indiana Jones movie of the trilogy, The Crusade. It's like they did the same thing. You had this dark Temple of Doom, and then all of a sudden they're like, all right, now let's put Indiana Jones back as a teacher. You like that, you like the Nazis. Let's bring them back. You liked all the traps. So in the third act of this movie, there's going to be traps. And instead of melting people, it's going to be ghoulish when he drinks from the goblet. They brought back the original. So they wanted to do like this Raiders DLC for Crusade. It's the same movie as Raiders and it's soft again and nice, and he's kind of, it's something he'd go on to do again. What I appreciate about Jabba's palace this time was I didn't realize how they pushed all those monsters in the front and then they just had regular people like in the background, because I noticed this time there was some dude that looked like Candyman with his jacket just chilling behind Jabba. I was like, oh, there's actually like regular humans hanging out behind all these, like, there's that weird frog monster just chill and not doing anything. I was like, well, who are all these people gathered here? Like you're talking about, why is Boba there? I mean, it must be a happening place. He's just hanging out.
Lots of musical acts there, that's for sure.
Hey, Jabba loves his music, man.
I come here for the entertainment.
It certainly feels like Return of the Jedi's Jabba scene compared to the Cantina scene. It feels like in Jedi, it's far more sort of performative. They're all like coming towards the camera behind Luke. And, you've got Klaatu there going like this and the Gamorrean guards kind of stomping around. Whereas in Star Wars, they're in their booths, they're having their own chats. And then when the lightsaber thing happens with Kenobi, they'll turn around to look. It feels like people are having their own lives. Whereas with Return of the Jedi and that Jabba scene, it feels like they're there for the scene to me when I watch it now.
Well, I did think it was interesting this time around watching the Jabba scene. I guess the Bib Tuna dude, once Luke does the Jedi mind trick on him, he does kind of disappear in the back and C-3PO steps forward. And it kind of shows Jabba like how he treats the droids. When he's done with someone, he just discards them. And you could kind of see it with that. This time around, I noticed it with that character. And I thought that was kind of cool. Like he's kind of discarded after that scene to the background.
Bib Fortuna is one of my favorite characters. I mean, just the way he speaks in that kind of like pig Latin, R2 de Toa type of stuff.
And he swears like the second he's on screen, like he calls Jabba wanker. Like, I remember as a teenager going, whoa, hang on a minute. Did he just say that?
It's such a great design too,
Yeah.
Like I've always
teeth.
I was fascinated by his action figure too as a kid. And I think that's...
Yeah, because the figure kind of looked wet as well, didn't it? It looked kind of slimy and wet, yeah.
And I also wanted to take his head tail thing and straighten it out and stuff. I love those types of figures, where you could actually interact with them a little bit more. Ones with the helmets. Yeah.
Robe and the kind of chest piece underneath, didn't he? Yeah. And the staff with the sort of spindle on it. Yeah.
I love that meme that's going around where it's I can't remember what movie it's from, where the girl's like, say those 3 words.
3 words. Say it, and I'm yours.
They wanna wonder.
Thank you. That's all I needed to hear.
I think of that actor, Michael Carter, Bib Fortuna. I think of him every time I go on the Underground because he's the guy in American Werewolf in London that is chased through the Underground.
Oh, really?
If ever I'm in a tube station in London and it's kind of quiet, I feel like I'm in that movie, which scared me for years when I was a kid. And I think of him, yeah.
Staying with Jabba's palace a few more minutes. Seeing Book of Boba Fett really recast the Rancor Keeper, who apparently showed up in Book of Boba Fett, but I didn't realize it was the same character. But like this whole thing of how the bond between a Rancor Keeper and the Rancor, and like when he cries after the Rancor monster is dead, I'm just like, now I feel totally bad. Like when I was a kid, I was just like, oh, isn't that funny? This guy's crying over a monster. But then now I'm just like, oh man, like this is pathos right here. And then you compare that to the scenes of droids have pain sensors now. This is a thing. We put pain sensors in droids and that whole thing where the the droid is being tortured so reminds me of just like a Disney ride. It reminded me of like Pirates of the Caribbean.
That's so funny.
Like the guy turns a thing, the droid turns, it comes down, and then it comes back up, and they just keep doing that. I'm like, that's odd.
It feels like at some point they said they wanted Cy Snootles and the Rebo band to start up on that big scream, and they wanted it to match with somebody else screaming. Okay, let's make a droid do it. And nobody went, do droids scream? You know, do they feel pain? It's just they put that idea together and off they went. Maybe George wasn't on the set that day.
We were talking about how characters might die. I mean, when Han Solo looks at the Millennium Falcon and he has this, I don't know, it's just a strange feeling, I'm never going to see her again. That never comes back whatsoever. And that's like this moment of pathos where I was like, oh, wow, yeah, something bad might happen. But don't worry, nothing bad happens.
It's probably when Lando was due to die.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And get Mon Mothma and her thing where she's just like, oh, many Bothans died to bring us this information. And you're just like, oh, fuck, man, that sounds like really intense. Like, give me that movie. Don't give me Rogue One. Give me the Bothans that are dying because of this. Like, that's what I want to see is like these Bothans.
Well, that's much later, of course, isn't it? Yeah, for Return of the Jedi. But I tried to recut a trailer once. I'll make a Return of the Jedi trailer to make it dark. So I started with every hero has a journey or something. I was sort of mirroring the early prequel one. And I picked a bit of dialogue. You know, there's that bit of dialogue where Han Solo says, you're throwing away a fortune here. Don't be a fool, to Jabba when he's trying to negotiate with him. I put that in as the Falcon was entering the Death Star. And I proceeded with a bit of him and Lando kind of talking or something. So I tried to use some of the bits of dialogue to sort of kind of make you worried about the characters and about the iconic spaceship and stuff. And it's amazing how quickly you can snip out certain scenes from that movie and give it a darker feel. You know, the stuff with the Emperor, the lightsaber battle at the end, you get that kind of chorus and voices that rises up after he says, you know, about his sister. There are moments in there sort of sprinkled throughout, but it feels like as they remove scenes and swap things around, they forgot what they also had left in some cases that no longer work. You know, they would have worked perhaps with the scenes left in, who knows. But there's a really good book called The Annotated Screenplays. Laurent, it's really good, and it kind of picks out all of those different changes, all those evolutions of the script. And, you know, it's always tantalizing, isn't it, for fans like us to go, oh, I wonder what it would have been like if this had happened, X, Y, and Z had happened. But yeah, I think there is a better movie in there somewhere. I don't know if there's ever been a fan edit or trying to make it darker, because there's probably means to do that now, I would think. Be interesting, because it is the least favorite of a lot of people of that original trilogy. You know, it's usually number 3. So maybe it's time somebody does go in there and have a little play with it.
I don't know if you could save it from the Ewoks, though.
Yeah, we all wish that they were Wookiees, right, at the time, like when George was talking about the Wookiees. But then we saw the Wookiees in one of the prequels, and it was
Revenge of the Sith.
Revenge of the Sith. It was pretty bad.
I love that movie, though. It's my 3rd favorite Star Wars movie, I gotta say. But that's why I won't ever be hard on you saying you like Jedi, because I get it. I have my Revenge of the Sith as my 3rd favorite. It just got re-released, and my friends went to see it. I'm like, it's so good. They're like, and blowing me off. It's great.
It did really well. It got like in the top 5 movies of the week here in the charts.
Oh, it did. Over here, too. And then it was gone in a week later. I wasn't able to go see it. I was so bummed. It was just a week release. But going back to what you were saying about the Lando and the Millennium Falcon, what I always got from that scene was him telling Han, there won't be a scratch on it. And then you start seeing it get messed up. It turns into like that Corey Feldman movie, License to Drive, where he has the car and he starts messing it up. Again, it just goes silly. I just think the first half of this movie with Jabba and the Sarlacc pit and all that stuff. But then once they start getting on, I love the speeder bike scene, though, too. It's one of my favorite things. But after that is when I start to tune out. I mean, even though one of my favorite shots in a Star Wars movie is the POV from the cockpit with all the TIE fighters coming at it. That's probably one of my... That and the Star Destroyer crashing into the other. Those are some of my favorite moments from a Star Wars movie. Like, I love that stuff. But it's just, unfortunately for me, it's like not my least favorite Star Wars movie by a mile at all. But as an adult, when I was a kid, I loved the Ewok stuff. I loved it. But as I got older, it just, it doesn't work for me as it used to when I was younger. And I think that's how it is with a lot of adults.
Mentioning those battle scenes at the end, you know, they're some of the best battle scenes in those Star Wars movies, and even some of the later ones. The complexity of some of those shots. There's a documentary, which I'm sure you've will have seen at some point. It's called How to Film the Impossible. And they visit ILM. And this guy's got like this sheet of like A3 paper, and it's got like a grid on it. And there's an X to mark where every ship interacts with another ship or crosses the path of another ship in that famous shot where there's like 75 elements or something. Just the complexity that they had to go through doing that optically just kind of blows my mind. I've spoken to some of those guys on my podcast, and I can never quite come to terms with just how difficult that must have been to kind of imagine and plot out and then do optically and still maintain the resolution. And, you know, there is a mistake in it. Famously, there's a mistake in it where two TIE fighters appear in front of the Falcon rather than behind it where they should be, just for a frame or two. But yeah, some of that stuff in those battle scenes is just fantastic. Just the sort of choreography of it, the way that you can read those shots and understand the geography. And they're doing that with models, you know, and doing it optically composited. It's pretty amazing.
Well, even just the shots of the Ewok encampment where you've got the 3 or 4 different planes of action and you see them in the trees and everything. I was just like, that's really gorgeous. Because I think of something like, you know, Fellowship of the Ring, and they do something similar with when they come to Rivendell, and you just see like, oh yeah, here's this foreground, here's this background, here's this midground action. But to do that all with matte paintings and double exposures and all these things, is just like, wow, that's pretty amazing.
Some of the best matte paintings in the trilogy, I would say, you know, Mike Pangrazio, Chris Evans, and I think Harrison Ellenshaw might have done some as well. But yeah, some of that, whenever you see those posters online, like these are matte paintings, there's always 1,000 people going, wow, I didn't know this was a matte painting. It's such an amazing sort of lost art in a way.
Vader's entrance into the movie with all of the troopers there, and you're just like, that's a matte painting? Like, the guys that are moving are all real, but then all these stormtroopers standing here, I'm just like, holy shit, that is amazing that you could do that.
The concept of that Death Star just half built, I think it's iconic. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, it really is a nice design. There's some fantastic designs in this film. They feel like they belong, don't they? Like every kind of, even the speeder bikes, you feel, oh yeah, they feel like Star Wars instantly. I think, you know, having those same designers move through the trilogy, you know, Nilo and the others, Joe Johnston, and yeah.
Just even having Joe Johnston and Ralph McQuarrie doing those paintings. I mean, it's amazing now when I watch some of the newer Star Wars stuff and I'll be like, oh, I've seen that before. Where have I seen that? And then I think back to those old paintings from 77, 80, 83. And I'm just like, that's where I saw, like, those images are so burned in my mind, like seeing a throwaway character in like the Han Solo story. And I'm like, oh, that was one of those McQuarrie paintings.
Oh, yeah. I think The Mandalorian used like concept art from Empire they used with like the ice spiders or something. And what?
That's right. Yeah, that was a McQuarrie, wasn't it?
When you watch all the making of, and then, you know, Insler book where you just see like the Bibford, you know, whatever made it on screen, there was concepts before it, a number of concepts before it that got there. And all the concepts are amazing. Also, it's just like, but, you know, they just couldn't pull it off yet.
We should probably address the elephant or the bantha in the room and talk a little bit about the sister and just this whole, from a certain point of view, and yes, there is another kind of thing. That was the thing I was talking about, in that people just don't believe when you tell them how much Star Wars changed from beginning to end, because somehow George seems to have sold it that he knew exactly what he was doing from the beginning. And I'm just like, no, that is the absolute opposite of truth. He did not. He might have had a plan, but it changed so much as it went along.
I have concepts of a plan.
My God, this whole thing of we're going to retrofit Anakin to be your father, and that Obi-Wan didn't tell you about this stuff. And surprise, you have a sister. So I guess the whole sister thing, it just feels like a way to resolve the romance between Han and Luke and Leia. It doesn't add anything to the story whatsoever. It might have, like, back during, you know, Splinter in the Mind's Eye or something like that, had we learned that they were brother and sister. And that's what those, like, training scenes in, one of those second trilogy things, like where we had the fake Leia that just looked absolutely terrible, you know, the de-aged Leia. Like, I was like, oh, well, that reminds me of this thing. But yeah, it's like, why do we have to have that? I guess now because of the force powers that Ben Solo ended up having. But again, that just was all we don't know what the hell we're doing when it came to that second trilogy.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about George, and him kind of changing his mind. All you got to do is look at those annotated scripts in that book and look at any interviews he gave early on. Yes, he had plans in his mind to make multiple movies, multiple trilogies potentially, but he was mixing and matching ideas, and that's what he did. And, like every creative endeavor, you have to think on your feet on the day and try and make the best of it. And I think occasionally he just kind of like lost sight of where things were going. I mean, if it was always his plan for Luke and Leia to be brother and sister, then what the heck was he doing in The Empire Strikes Back with them sort of creating a kind of love triangle? And yes, that idea was there in early concepts that they were brother and sister, but then he sort of abandoned that. But then, I've got enough money to make another movie. Okay, now we need to kind of resolve this. Like he didn't originally have Obi being killed off at the start, and then he realized he was just standing around and had to have that conversation with Guinness. I always think back to there's that moment where Luke says in Star Wars, "How did you meet my father?" or "How did you know my father?" And Alec Guinness does this kind of intake of breath and he looks the other way like, shit, I've got to tell this story. But I remember seeing an interview with Guinness where he said that at that point, I sort of assumed that there was a backstory. So I just realized that if I just did a little thing with my face, that it would look like there's some big deal went on all those years ago between us. And of course, that now has resonance because of, we know what evolved afterwards and unfolded afterwards. But yeah, I find those sequences really weird in Return of the Jedi when Luke tells Leia that Vader's his father. Her reaction is really odd if she's figuring out, oh, hang on, he's my father too, and he tortured me. And we've been chasing across the galaxy trying to, get rid of this guy. And where's the moment where she even reacts to them being siblings or that she's the daughter of Vader? It's just not there. It just feels really weird, that whole scene. And then Han Solo comes in and he does that really weird sort of patting on the back thing, kind of looking around with Leia. None of that feels like... I think the only thing that really carries that is the atmosphere there. There's that mist sort of hanging in the air and it's quiet out the back while all the other stuff's going on. And then there's that nice Luke and Leia score going on. I think it would have benefited from having a few more takes or a few more rewrites, that whole scene.
Yeah. You'll tell Luke, won't you? Another un-Han Solo moment. But what I find fascinating about the other thing is I was too young when I saw Empire in the theater to catch the other line. It wasn't until The Secret History of Star Wars, when I listened to that book over and over again, that I realized how people were like, who is the other? And listening to that book, it's about, because George was going to do another trilogy and the other was going to be carried on. According to that book, that's what the other was supposed to be, the character that was going to be in the sequel trilogy. Because at that point, George Lucas was like, I'm making another trilogy after this. And then somehow, while doing Return, he just got burned out and was like, all right, we're not doing that. There was a star log. I wish I wrote down which date it was, but it says right in front of me, Star Wars saga continues. And it says, Revenge of the Jedi is released. That was back when it was still called Revenge of the Jedi. On May 25th, 1983, the firm begins plans for the next trilogy of films in the 9-part saga, So they were ready to go with it. And I guess he just got so burnt with Jedi and just knew it's going to be a nice movie and we're going to have the Ewok stuff and he doesn't want to do them anymore. And then that's when the other turns into Princess Leia. It's like, okay, now I can turn her into this other. But I guess people were so upset by that for waiting 3 years to find out who the other was. I was too young at the time, but that stuff I was all learning from Secret History of Star Wars. And then they said in this Starlog article that they were going to do the sequel trilogy in reverse order. They were going to do 3, 2, and then 1.
Wow.
Yeah, I have it right here. I'm looking right at it. That was in Starlog. So they did, when it was Revenge of the Jedi, before it turned into Return, they still had thoughts of making other Star Wars movies. But then maybe it was the divorce and everything where he was just like, this is maybe ruining me and I want to keep doing Star Warses. Maybe the technology is not where I want it yet and I'm going to take some time off.
I'm going to make a lot of experimental films now. That's my dream.
I wish we would have got some
Never
of that.
happened, sadly. Yeah.
We got Howard the Duck.
That's kind of experimental. And Tucker.
I tried watching those 2 Ewok movies today. Holy shit.
I haven't.
That was probably my worst cinema experience as a kid. I remember my mum and dad saying, "Oh, here's in the UK, Caravan of Caravan of Courage was on." And my parents said, "Oh yeah, we've got a surprise for you." And they gave me this ticket. And I was like, "Star Wars?" Like, oh wow. And I'm sitting there going, "Where's Luke? Where's Han Solo? Where's Princess Leia? What is this thing?" And I remember walking out of the cinema and what was that, 85? So I would have been like 8 or 9 years old. I think that's the first time I really experienced like proper disappointment, because where are my favorite characters? I want to see the further adventures of these people. You know, where is it?
I mean, they don't look as good either, right? The Ewoks and those.
No, they were made pretty cheaply, you know, and they were made. Well, it's like the other thing you think about Jedi, you know, as opposed to the other two. You know, the first one they went to Tunisia, they went to the UK, of course, to shoot in Elstree. Second one they went to Finse in Norway, and then back into the UK, obviously. Also, Elstree's Return of the Jedi, but then they did the rest of it in the States, you know. It feels like they didn't kind of branch out and go to some exotic place. So you do kind of go, oh yeah, that's the Redwood Forest, and oh yeah, that's Yuma, Arizona. Yeah. Yeah, maybe that was a budgetary thing as well, or just you know, you can kind of understand why Lucas ended up doing so much digitally, because all of the pain he went through with sets being blown away and flooding and whiteouts and snowstorms and all of that stuff. I can totally understand it.
Or the sandstorm that didn't get included.
When I did the shark documentary, Sharksploitation, when I interviewed Carl Gottlieb and Joe Alves, they both said and swear by, they wish they could have done CG with the shark. They were like, you know, even though we love that fucking shark, we love it and we wouldn't want a CG. But according to them, they're like, in a second, that's what they wish they had, because they're the ones that were in the trenches dealing with it and the stress and the horror. But they, in a second, would want to do a CG one shark.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm making this Joe Alves documentary. I've been for a couple of years, and we're going out to Martha's Vineyard next week to shoot some stuff with Joe. And what's the line Joe said? You know, you might as well give it a go because it's going to be the best there is because nobody else is trying it, you know. And that's how they kind of approach Jaws. It's like, yeah, okay, we're going to make this thing. We're going to put it in the sea, and we're going to have to find this location with the bed of the beach has got to be this height, and they've got to find, you know, places inland. And it turns out Martha's Vineyard is the right place. George talks about building the sail barge in Return of the Jedi, how it took 300 laborers, 5 months, or whatever the stats are, he says in that documentary. And then it's on film for like a minute and a half, 2 minutes or something. You just have to kind of do the best that you can to get that thing. You don't need to show off the thing that you've made. I think that's one of the real lessons I learned from George in that documentary is, you know, you shouldn't ever give yourself a pat on the back for the graft that you've done, the work that you've gone through, because maybe you need to cut that shot out, actually. Maybe it doesn't work. Maybe it did take 6 months to get it, but maybe it needs to come out of the movie. Maybe Return of the Jedi needs more of this teachings.
Yeah, that sail barge and then the Sarlacc set that they did is huge. And it's insane to wrap your head around that they built all that.
I hate this whole thing that we have to go back to Tatooine. Why was Jabba... We don't have the scene of him coming to the docking bay and threatening Han Solo in the world that the three of us grew up in. That scene didn't exist. Why was Jabba on Tatooine? Like, why couldn't his palace have been someplace else? And it just feels like we keep coming back to Tatooine and like all of these, even when it's not Tatooine, it's Jakku, it's another desert planet. And I'm just like, come on, guys. Like, you know, Luke says in the first movie,
if there's a bright center to the universe, you're on the planet that is farthest from.
Classic line. This is the backwater burb, but instead it becomes the center of the fucking universe for all 9 movies. And you're just like, for Christ's sakes, can we get away from Tatooine? Thank God they don't go back to Tatooine and Empire. Use some other planets, man. Let's go see some other places. But this is just like, all right, we're back here. We're doing this again. And you know, basically they replace Darth Vader as a bad guy with the Emperor. And even when it came to the Emperor as a kid, I was a little disappointed because I was like, oh, he's just a little old man. And like, I was expecting somebody like tall and grandiose and somebody very, very commanding. Instead, he's like Mr. Burns, basically, the way he like carries his hands and stuff.
I paid a pretty penny for this pretty penny, but it was worth it.
Though I do love what a snide bastard he is, especially when they're like,
I'm afraid.
afraid the deflector shield will be quite operational when your friends arrive.
Oh man, the way he's just mocking Luke, I'm like, okay, that's pretty good. I like that. And I like Ian McDiarmid's voice, especially in this movie.
I think it's the best sort of version of the Emperor. I think in the prequels, it just feels like he's wearing this really big kind of prosthetic and it all feels a bit fake, where he's sort of hooded and you see his piercing eyes, but you don't get kind of good look at him. I think that's a good thing in Jedi. I quite like the Emperor. It's a terrible action figure. I remember sending off,
give it a rope.
I remember sending off tokens for that, and it was like one per household, and I sent one to my one to my other grandparents, one to my house, and then I got them and was like, wow, it looks like my nana.
Those little Kenner proofs of purchase. Well, and then it had the electric plastic thing that you could put on it, so it looked like Force Lightning.
Not the original one.
I didn't have that either.
Power of the Force, 90s one. Yeah. This one was just like the walking stick and a grey thing with a face. That was it.
And the cloak was plastic. It was they didn't give you.
It was the mold,
cloth.
wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
Why were Jawas the best action figures? Because they had the cloth cloaks.
I had another Ben Kenobi, and I painted it like grey and put Luke's Jedi robe on him, and that was my Emperor.
Nice.
I was so pissed off with that Emperor.
Much better.
Well, you're talking about Tatooine. I mean, it was going back to what I was talking about with Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think they just want to remind people everything from the first movie again somehow by putting it back there. That's my only thought of why they wouldn't put him somewhere else. Yeah, because like you said, it doesn't, you could just call it a different, it doesn't have to be that play. You're right.
Wasn't there something in some of the early scripts that Luke was going to go back to Ben's house to try and discover something about building a lightsaber? And, so you've got that. So then when they remove that, it's like I was talking about earlier, they're like, okay, so we're still on Tatooine, but we're going to do this now. So where's the motivation to go there anymore? It doesn't make any sense.
That makes sense. When I was talking about the cave, I was thinking, oh, that kind of looks like Ben's house, but they don't ever show it from the other angle. Inside the cave looking out.
It is a cave in that instance because there's a matte painting that was unused that had like a little cutout for R2 and 3PO, and you could see the X-Wing and presumably the Y-Wing that Leia and Chewie arrived in. Yeah, I think, again, it's like each time they sort of changed their mind on how a scene was going to work or who was going to be involved, they forgot the original intention of why they were there in the first place, and therefore it loses its meaning.
Well, yeah, like in your film Dementary, you had this whole thing about prune-faced action figure characters that were supposed to be on Endor, and I'm like, why weren't they on Endor helping to fight and stuff like that? That's kind of disappointing.
I never noticed those guys. Thank you, Jamie.
Neither did I.
Those guys out.
Yeah, you gotta watch Jamie's film Dementary. It's fucking phenomenal. Instead of watching Return of the Jedi, watch that.
Returning to Jedi, still on Vimeo, but I remember when there was that sort of little resurgence of Star Wars, the sort of the dark times. I remember about 1991 going to Forbidden Planet here in London, and there was a fanzine there called the UK Star Wars Fan Club. And it was a black and white fanzine. I think I had a color cover, but it was all black and white in the middle. And there was an article in there, a feature in there each quarter or whatever it was. And it said, "Have you noticed?" I think was the line. And I wrote in to say, I've just bought the widescreen versions of the film. And for the first time, I've seen FX7, the medical droid, on the left-hand side of the frame in the Rebel meeting. And then wait a minute, there's like these prune-face guys in the back. And I'd never seen them in the 4x3 before and all of that stuff. And when you bought those widescreen editions and blew them up to horrible low resolution, there was so much more in the frame, that like you see that big, weird Amanaman character, like the yellow and green guy with the staff with the skulls on it, and all of these amazing designs that are sort of lurking in the background. Because those early VHSs that I had, they were so murky, like you could barely see any detail in them. I remember watching Alien on the VHS for the first time. I could barely see a damn thing. But yeah, I remember that was a big thing, the UK Star Wars Fan Club. And then there was that build-up and like, George is going to re-release the movies and he's going to make some changes. And then there's Star Wars Insider magazines coming out and all of that. And then, it just was a sort of arc of disappointment from there on, really.
Let's go ahead and take a break, and then we'll be back to talk about those dark times and maybe talk about the unmasking of Darth Vader as well, if we're talking about disappointments. Anyway, we'll be back in a few minutes with an interview with producer Jim Bloom, right after these brief messages.
Classicy is a film journey to the East, a curated streaming service offering the best of contemporary and classic cinema from Eastern Europe and Asia. Using coupon code Mike50, you can get Classicy membership for just $5.50 a month, giving you the opportunity to sample award-winning films, documentaries, silent masterpieces, classic comedies, and more. You could also get access to the Classicy Journal, exclusive cast and director interviews, video essays, and watch lists. Visit klassiki.online and sign up now to start your adventure in film.
I wanted to ask you about Jedi, especially because your title changed between Empire and Jedi, and I was curious as far as how did your responsibilities change between the two films?
On The Empire Strikes Back, I was originally hired as an assistant producer. And then because of my responsibilities and my work, Gary came to me with, I'm sure, George's blessing and said, "You've done such a good job. We want to make you an associate producer and have you share that title with Robert." Robert was one of the great men. Originally, when we were hired, because Gary offered me a job as an assistant producer, that was my title, which could mean a lot of different things, but I knew quite a bit about movie making at that particular point. And I had started with them in 1972 on American Graffiti and had stayed in touch with them over the years. Then, it was like in November, December 78, early 78, Gary called and said, "I'd like you to be my assistant producer." And it was like, whoa, I had seen Star Wars and I had loved it. And I remember, if I need to talk quicker, just give me a. And I also tend to jump around quite a bit. I had gone in the spring of 77, I went to visit Gary in his office at Universal. And because I had stayed in touch with him over the years, and he was kind of like a mentor to me, and I enjoyed talking to him. And if I needed a piece of advice, he would often offer it to me. And he took out this coffee table book of still photos that had been comped of Star Wars, because it was a couple of weeks before the release of the movie. And it just blew me away. Completely blew me away. It was just like, oh my God, look at this stuff. This is just fucking amazing. And, I was just so taken with the look of these, mostly black and white comped photos that they put together in this coffee table book. And then when the picture opened, I went to see it the first weekend, and I was so taken, I was tempted to stay there and watch it again. But I didn't want to get back in line, but I'm sure I saw it again very soon after. But I went to some early show at the Regency, which was the big theater at the time in San Francisco, big 70 millimeter screen, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, everybody else. Well, that was Star Wars. Yeah. I was just like, whoa. And then anyway, after Star Wars came out and it did so well, I went to work in the summer of 77. My first job as a first assistant director was with Matthew Robbins directing Corvette Summer, where I met with Corvette Summer, at which point Mark got into a car accident and completely blew his face apart. Unfortunately, a little bit before Mark, this great looking California surfer kid, and just destroyed his face in this car accident, which is why in Empire, the movie opens with the Wampa ripping his face apart, because they needed a reason to say what happened to Mark's face. And that was it. They covered him up and the Wampa rips his face apart, which is why he looks so different. I was a very young first AD, even by any standards. I was 24. I hadn't turned 25 yet. I was pretty young to be an assistant director at that time. And then after Corvette Summer, Phil Kaufman asked me to work on The Body Snatchers, which I did, which was great. It still holds up today as a great movie, even more so today than before, because, one of the great lines from the movie, Donald Sutherland says to, I'm forgetting Brooke's name, her last name at the moment. She sort of becomes his love interest in the movie. With what's happened to my husband? He's not the same anymore. And Donald says, well, maybe he's become a Republican, because he's become a pod person. And he's just so weird. Yeah, and ain't it more true today than it's ever been before? It was true in the 1970s, but even more so now than it was then. Unfortunately, and much to my dismay and depression. And then after that, Gary called And he said, I'd like you to come work for me on Empire. Oh, what do you want me to do? He said, I want you to be my assistant producer. I want you to help me. I want you to come to London. I want you to go on location and help me make this movie because it's going to be bigger and we'd like you around. And it was like, whoa. And I remember saying to him, I said, Gary, I always thought at this point in my career, I might sort of turn my attention to becoming a director because I'd worked with so many great directors. I mean, it was just like mind boggling that in my short career, I had gotten to work with George and Francis Coppola and Sam and Bob Altman and Hal Ashby and Phil Kaufman and Matthew. And I'm sure I'm going to forget some people, Steven Spielberg and all these great directors. And I had learned so much from working with all of them. Yet after working with Phil, I thought, I think I could do this. I think I've been needed plus 46 episodes on the Streets of San Francisco TV show, working with Carl Malden and Michael Douglas. And what a treat that was. And Gary said, Jim, he said, I want to tell you that there isn't anything that you're not going to learn on this show working with me that won't make you a better director. And he was right. There wasn't anything. I learned so much working on those movies, and I learned a lot about producing movies as well, and an incredible amount of visual effects, because my first part of working on Jedi was to move ILM from Van Nuys up to Santa Fe and to hire all the guys that I brought up who had worked on Star Wars up to Santa Fe. Those guys, when you think of the core guys and what they've all gone on to do, Dennis Muren, Joe Johnston, Richard Edlund, Phil Tippett, Ken Ralston, Bruce Nicholson, Lauren Peterson, Steve Gawley, Peter Coran, all the guys who went on to lead all of the key departments at ILM. And so when I started my job on Empire, working at the Parkway House, which was George's office, and, I was in some little back room of the kitchen, was where my office was. And, working with, I used to joke, I called the Parkway Princesses, which were Jane Bay and Lucy Autry Wilson and Chrissy England, and Chrissy went on to run ILM and become a great production person and all these other people. And then they had found the warehouse in Santa Fe where ILM was going to be. And then we went to work on building ILM into a visual effects facility, with being sort of multi-purpose, which was to be a visual effects facility. But when we weren't making Star Wars movie, it would become a visual effects facility for other movies. And the first two other movies that we did at that time were Dragon Slayer and then Raiders of the Lost, were the next two movies that came through ILM. And then, we got ready to do Jedi. So to sort of explain the difference between the two things was that I was the general manager at ILM as well as being the associate producer on the movie. So I had two hats to wear. And Gary wanted me to go to run the second unit in Norway. It was like his producer, second unit producer in Norway. And so I moved to London in November of 78 and then stayed there November, December, January, February, scouted Norway with everybody. And then went back with the unit in early February when we began principal photography. And principal photography was supposed to be 5 days and turned into 7 or 8 and blah, blah, blah. And then I stayed with the second unit, which was supposed to be 2 or 3 weeks and became 6 or 7. Because as the joke is, the weather's never this bad until the movie company shows up. And that's exactly what happened. There were days on end when, just like there were with the first unit, that it was a complete whiteout. And we couldn't get up on the glacier to shoot. It just wasn't safe to go up there. You couldn't see. And we were in these snowcats and we were following the way the cross-country skiers do. The Norwegians just go out and go. But they tie themselves and they go from pole to pole to pole to get up to the glacier, to get up the mountain or go where they were doing, because there are a lot of dangerous crevasses around. But we couldn't move a unit up there and work. And we always used to joke that, they would serve pasta for lunch and from the time it got from the plate to your mouth, it was frozen, or you take a pea and the time that the pea hit the snow, it was frozen. It was really cold. But then, it was, February into March and later in March, eventually it got a little bit better. And then we got our work done. And, some of the most important work, which is why Gary wanted me there, was because I understood the visual effects of the movie. And I understood how critical, when you put a shot together, it's not just the unknown rebel troopers running away from the explosions planted in the snow, but it's being able to see the snow walkers coming up from behind them. And the other guys, people, they hadn't made a lot of effects movies before then. It was still a very young business back in the late 70s and 80s, as far as what they had done on Star Wars and what we were trying to do on Empire. And so I used to argue with Peter McDonald, who was the second unit director, and then he would set up a shot and I'd look through the lens and I'd go, Peter, we got to frame up. He'd say, what do I need to frame up for? I said, because the snow walkers are back there and the snow walkers are firing laser cannons into the snow that are creating the explosions in the foreground and the midground that all of these troops are running away from. Okay. And he would do that. And then you got this beautiful battle that we created up there. And then the other thing that I also knew that was critically important were all of the snow speeder helicopter background plates that we shot with a 65 millimeter camera mounted on a gyroscopic Westcam rig. For, understanding all that stuff and appreciating the movie and knowing all of the storyboards by heart and all of the great, conceptual work that Ralph McQuarrie did, who I became very friendly with, during those days. I just had a great appreciation for how beautiful the movie could be because I knew that Ralph did it on Star Wars and I knew, well, we can do it again. And, I also try to instill on everybody this esprit de corps. We're making a sequel, but it's going to be better. It's not going to be shitty because most sequels were crappy and this was shitty. So when Empire was over, George came to me with Howard Kazanjian, and first it was Charlie Weber. But anyway, they said, we want you to be a co-producer on Jedi. And there'll be two of you. You and Robert be in the UK and you'll be over here. Because the other mandate for Jedi, different than Empire, is that we were going to shoot all the location work in the United States. Because it was getting too dangerous to go to Tunisia. We had to do Jabba stuff there. And, we needed to find a desert. And George always had a vision to do a redwood planet, redwood tree planet, which is what we did. And so, we had to go out and find those locations in the US and, hire the crews and blah, blah, blah. The other thing that was advantageous is that we were a San Francisco-based company, not an LA-based company. And I knew who all the good crew guys were in San Francisco, which there was one, which was a challenge because they're not as talented as the LA guys were. Because at that point, I had worked with San Francisco crews and done a lot of work with LA crews, on Bound for Glory and Coming Home and Close Encounters and Peckinpah's movie, The Killer Elite. I knew what it was like to do a studio movie, to do independent movies out of LA, how talented, the movie business was in Los Angeles. It wasn't in San Francisco. And so, but I had to kind of cobble a group together that had the chops to do a movie like Jedi. So the responsibilities changed. And the other thing that changed was that when we made Empire and I went to London in November, the goal was not for me to be the general manager of ILM, but to be system producer on the picture and to be, overseeing ILM a little bit, but to hire a general manager. And I hired a guy who I had worked in live action because I felt that he had the production responsibility that wasn't emblematic at that point in the visual effects business in the US. Because, who are you going to hire? Well, he either worked on Close Encounters or you worked on Star Wars. You either work for Doug Trumbull or you work for, the first John company. And so I said, gee, makes a lot of sense to me to bring some production guys in here because they know about making movies and it's not that much different. You got different groups, but everybody's contributing to the movie and the scheduling's a little bit different. And so I brought that skill set with me to Empire. So I hired a guy who I had worked with on the Streets of San Francisco TV show who lived up there, who knew a lot of the local guys. And I also hired him because I knew he could make a deal with the local union rep because we kind of had to do that in order to bring the guys out of LA. And the guy in San Francisco was a vice president in the IA nationally. And he had the cojones and in the USIA to tell the guys in LA, no, we're doing it this way and I'm going to do it that way. And they would listen to him because he was on that executive board. So it worked out that way. There were other financial reasons why we didn't want to do it with the LA group. We wanted to do it as a San Francisco group, and we got special dispensations from the IA in LA when we did the live action photography to hire camera guys and construction coordinators and special effects guys to do the work that had to be done. And when it came to like grip and electric and stuff, we mostly worked with local guys out of San Francisco under their contract. And the LA guys would come up and work under the San Francisco contract, and it got worked out. So, I did a lot of that stuff. And then on Jedi, after production was over, the guy who I hired from Streets of San Francisco was like, I can't deal with these visual effects guys. It's just too much for me. The visual effects guys are different than live action guys. Live action, we're going to go in and get it done and blah, blah, blah. And you're moving all the time and it's quick. And the visual effects guys are, a pretty nerdy group. I mean, if you talk to these guys, I say it affectionately because I really love all these guys because I knew them so well. We were all like a family, but it's a different group because they had a very different vision of filmmaking. Live action is put the camera down, get the actors, get the shot, blah, blah, blah. And visual effects is like, I got to build 20 different layers on how I'm going to put a shot together until it's finally done. And back then, everything was in the optical printer. It wasn't digital. He kind of missed being on the set. And after I came back from London, what happened was that we finished the Norwegian stuff and I was supposed to stay in London for the rest of the shoot. But Gary came to me and said, things are not going well in San Rafael. I want you to go home and supervise what's happening there. And I got back there, and as soon as I was there for a few weeks, Dick said, you're here. Thank you. It's been fun, but I'm out of here. You don't need me. You do it. You know it. You understand it better than I do. I don't enjoy it. I'm taking off. So he left. And then I took over at ILM and we put the picture out. And back then it was a very difficult, complicated movie to do because we were doing stuff that nobody had done before. So those were different responsibilities. And when Empire was over, I didn't want to spend my life running a visual effects facility. I wanted to be a film producer. I didn't want to be a visual effects general manager. And George wanted me to stay on and run the place. And I said, I'd really like to find somebody to take my place because I'd like to go back and make movies again. I like making movies from here's the script. Let's go make it all the way into the theater. But I like working with directors, and he said, okay. And then I brought Tom Smith in, who I had worked with right after American Graffiti. He was a documentarian, but he's kind of nerdy guy. I mean, I did that nicely. A very technical filmmaker, cameraman, editor, knew a lot about filmmaking. Tom came in and it was a good opportunity for Tom. Tom fell right in and he became the general manager for many years until he left. And then he became a producer at one point, produced visual effects and produced features and stuff like that. I still talk to Tom, he's still a friend. And so then Tom came in, and then after photography was over, Jedi was set up in such a way that Hal Borwood and Matthew Robbins, who I'd mentioned before, who I had met on Close Encounters when they came in to do additional script writing and also worked as like the first two characters to walk off the mothership when it landed in the Box Canyon, because they were the pilots from the 1940s who got carried away by the aliens. They were going to go make a movie called The Grid, which is this great science fiction time travel movie that I often think that Terminator stole from at some point, because it's all about coming from the future back to the present to fix something that will affect the future. We never made it, unfortunately. It was one of those, I put a design team together for Matthew. Hal was going to be the executive producer because he was going to rough and direct, so I was going to produce the picture. And we were set up at the Lad Company, and we needed a lot of pre-production so to figure out what the movie was going to look like and what it was going to cost. Because, that was part of this way of making movies. Then if you were doing stuff that nobody could quite visualize, and I hired Sid Mead. Sid used to be this great designer, be a wonderful, great designer, industrial designer. and Ralph McQuarrie and a guy named Peter Lloyd out of Colorado. And we had this great art department, and this guy, he's turned out all this wonderful conceptual stuff for this time travel movie. And we were like designing the future and designing the present. And I was in touch with a well-known professor of linguistics from UC Berkeley named George Lakoff, who was going to help us create a language of the future 500 years from now. And we were going to do some of the future stuff with subtitles, but people would be speaking whatever English was going to be. Yeah, it was really cool. It was a great idea. Anyway, the right stuff came out and it was a great movie, but it tanked. And when it tanked, the lead company, Warner Brothers, said, nope, we're not going to make the grid. Tell them to go find a partner. We'll give you 50% of the budget. Anyway, we didn't make the movie. There were things that I learned that I found out later when I went to work at the studio about the way movies are made that I didn't know then. And it's like, I wish I would have known then what I know now, which is when I'm forgetting the guy's name at Universal, said to me, I'll make it for 16 million, but I won't do it a penny more. And I said, I really need 18 to do it. He said, I'm only going to give you 16. Lead company will put up 8. I'll put up 8. And then you'll go make your movie. And I should have said, let's go. I should have just said, let's do it. Because I should have learned the lesson that Stephen taught me on Close Encounters, which was very funny, which was we were getting close to going to photography. And the guys at Columbia said to Stephen, lose 2 days out of the schedule. You got to cut back by 2 days. And I was like, I don't know, where are we going to find 2 days? And I went into a meeting with Stephen's office with the first assistant director, Chuck Myers, who's a great AD. And I was his second. And we gave Stephen the board. And we said, Stephen, we don't know where to find 2 days. Here's the board. And Stephen said, give me the board. And we handed the board to Stephen. And he took the board and he went, and he shook it. 2 little day strips, which is how you separated the days on a production board, fell out. And he picked them up and he handed them to Chuck and me. And he said, here, those are your 2 days. Let's go. He knew that once they got into it and they were making the move, they're not going to stop him. There's no way. And, the thing that I learned when I went to work at Sony as a creative and production executive was the filmmakers tell you 18 and the executives tell the corporation 20, and everybody's got a buffer built into this thing that you're doing so that they all look good. And that's a fucking game. The Grid would have been a really great movie, particularly because of the time. I love time travel and science fiction type stuff. And one of my favorite movies is Chris Marker's La Jetée. Great movie. I remember a producer named Tom Luddy, who passed away a couple of years ago, who was one of the first curators of the Pacific Film Mark back in Berkeley. And when I came out to Cal and went to school, I used to go to the Film Archive all the time and watch movies and hang out in the projection booth with the projectionist and watch movies or go down and see movies. And I remember that's where I first saw La Jetée, and it just blew me away. It's like, wow, it's a great movie. I just love the story. I just love the love story. A guy who dreams and he keeps dreaming, that he's on the jetty and he's witnessing something and he's not sure what it is. And he falls in love with this woman, and who's this woman? And then they grab him because he's got this intense dream quality about him. And they need somebody who's a dreamer that they can send to the past or to go figure out what's wrong. Anyway, I just thought it was a great idea. There were qualities about that Hal and Matthew borrowed to do The Grid. It was a love story, and there's a woman in the present and a woman in the future. And, they're trying to solve a problem. And the stuff just looked great. The stuff that Ralph came up with, and Sid came up with, was just like the first time I saw the Star Wars design stuff. It was like, whoa.
One difference as well between the two films was Gary Kurtz. You mentioned that he was kind of a mentor to you. How was that, not having him on the production of Jedi?
It was different. Gary and George had a falling out. I think it's well documented that Empire went millions of dollars over budget because of lots of different reasons. George decided he didn't want Gary to be the producer on Jedi. So he hired Howard. And then Howard came in. And it was fine. It was different. Very different guys, different producers, different backgrounds, different sensibilities, all those things. But from my point of view, it was fine. We were working with Kirshner was the best of the Star Wars directors. I think Empire is the best movie. And I love Star Wars as well. And then, I think Jedi was a different movie than the first two for lots of different reasons, different story thematically, where the company was at that point in time, what the mandates were, all of those different things, what was happening in George's life, both professionally and personally, and et cetera, et cetera. Kirsch is a real director. The performances that the actors give are by far the best in Empire, I think. There's some great stuff. I always joke that Princess Leia's, line in the snow cave, "I'd rather kiss a Wookiee," and Han says, "I can arrange that." It's, just little things like that, where I love, I forget, he's like, "I love you. I know." Han Solo goes, "I know." There's just stuff between the characters that was, that, Georgie's a great director, but I think Kirsch is really an actor's director. He had that sensibility. I love Kirsch. He was a great guy. I got to know him really well. He's a very funny guy.
Did you interact with Richard Marquand that much?
Well, I did, yes. And I think it was a tough show for Richard because we sort of took a director with not the experience that like a Kirsch had and put him into George's world. So he always would look to George to say, "What do you think? What do you think?" And so that was part of, I don't think he quite understand visual effects the way that George did at all. So that was also a challenge to come on board for all of that. And George was around quite a bit during the shooting with Richard, depending on what was going on. Because I think he sort of needed that help and support, most of the time the work was happening. Because it's, you're in like, "Hi, you want to come work playing George's playground?" That's kind of what you're doing. From Star Wars to Empire, it was a little bit different. But from Empire to Jedi, it was a lot different on top of that. Because it's George's world. It's George's movie, in a sense. And, but yeah, I liked Richard. But I think it was a tough assignment. But certainly one that he was happy to take on. Who wouldn't be happy to take on? You want to be a millionaire? Come direct these movies. That's kind of like a crass bottom line, but it's the movie, it is a business after all, and people think that way. Not only that, but it's also, you want to, come direct a sequel to the two most successful movies of all time or top five or whatever it is. It's like, how does a director say no? They usually don't unless their last name is Spielberg or says or you know what I mean? And that wasn't Richard. I don't know how many features Richard had done before. He did Eye of the Needle, which is a good movie. And I think the movie that attracted him to George.
I know with so many producers, so much of it is solving problems. And I was curious as far as some of the problems that you had to solve while you're making this.
From my point of view, is logistical crew. That was literally the first challenge for me, was putting a unit together without being able to call on all of the key people out of Los Angeles and keep the quality of the work up to where it had to be to make a Star Wars movie. That was a big issue. The other issue was initially was finding the locations. Okay, we want to go shoot in the desert. Where do you do that? In the United States. And, we looked all over with Robert and Norman Reynolds. Norman is great, wonderful production designer and a lovely guy, great guy. We took this reconnaissance for like 2 or 3 weeks where we went looking for locations for the desert and then for the woods. We went from LA to outside of Vegas to St. George, Utah, all around Utah, into Colorado, into the Four Corners area of Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, looking around those areas, trying to find Jabba's, where are we going to build the barge? Nobody would ever build a barge today. And back then, nobody had ever built a set as big as we built outside of Yuma, Arizona. We built a sailboat that didn't sail in the middle of the dunes. You know what I mean? It's like I remember when we first talked to sailing consultants who we hired to work on the movie. And it's like, they'd say, okay, what do you want to do? We said, we want to build a sailboat in the desert. And they would look at us like, what? It's like, who builds a sailboat that doesn't sail? And you're going to put it in the desert where it's windy. And how are we going to keep it from moving when the sails are sailboats? That's how they work. you put the sails up, and the sails apply pressure to the boat to make it go through the water. So those are some of the challenges, was building this huge built a boat out in the middle of the desert. So it was like being down there and getting the crew in and the time to do it all. And then the other difficult part about the redwoods is all the great redwoods are either in national parks, in state parks, or on private property. And the national parks and state parks are happy to have you. Just stay on the path. Don't walk off the path. We need to plant some explosions in the trees. It was like, what? No, we can't do that. Nor would you expect them to. And then the private forest people who owned a lot of the original growth, primary growth, never touched redwood. They didn't want anybody near it because it was back during the Save the Redwoods time. And they didn't want word out that they had stuff like this because they wanted to log it. They didn't want movie people coming in, left-wing movie people coming in and letting people know where their old primary growth forests were. So the challenge is how do you find somebody who's got it? Well, we did, and what's interesting is that we found this, it was a curtain of primary growth redwood between Highway 101 and this completely logged out old growth strand of redwoods. And they left the curtain up so that people on the highway couldn't see how they demolished all of the wood behind it. And that's why it was there, because they were saying, okay, we're going to, from their business point of view, it was, I think it was a private company. It wasn't a public company. It wasn't like Pacific Lumber. It was a small family group called Miller Relum. And it was like Miller and then spell the name backwards. That was the name of the group. And they owned these beautiful trees just south of the Oregon border and between Crescent City and the Oregon border. And our location supervisor for that redwood stuff, a woman named Mickey Herman, she'd scouted the entire coast of California. She knew every redwood grove from Santa Cruz to the Oregon border because she'd seen it all in helicopters. And she hired a local guy up in Crescent City who turned out to be a savior as far as finding this. And he found this piece of property and he knew the people and they invited us in. And the first day that we went looking for the redwood location, I remember walking through the redwoods, the 1,000-year-old redwood groves, and walking down into the hill and stepping into fern forests the ferns were up to my shoulder, and sinking into the leaves and all of this growth underneath these huge, like muir woods type redwoods. And I felt like I'd been transported back, thousands of years to be in this forest. I mean, it was a religious experience to do that. This stuff had never been touched. And so they said, oh yeah, you can shoot here. We want to put things on the trees. Okay, do whatever you want. We need to build a road. Oh, no problem. It was like we found the redwood planet and we found these trees that we thought we'd never get. It was just amazing. So those are some of the challenges. Okay, let's go find the locations. We got to do it here in the States because we're not going to Norway for the snow. We're not going to Tunisia for the desert, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, we found everything and we had to kind of launch those units and make it all work. And then we had to integrate a UK crew with an American crew because the UK guys were only bringing their keys over, not all their support people. Had to integrate art departments, US art department, UK art department. And we also had a big second unit up in the redwoods. We had to put a US second unit together to do all the second unit work, all the Ewok battle stuff without the principles, with walker feet and trees falling over and tree gags and explosions and, stuff like that. And we also had the Ewoks, which was the largest congregation of little people since The Wizard of Oz. Nobody had ever made, which is great fun, in a way. And they were all up in we put them all together in like 2 or 3 motels up in, it's north of Smith River, Brookings, in Brookings, Oregon. because it was close. And, it was kind of remarkable. We also did the whole Blue Harvest thing, because I knew that we couldn't make a Star Wars movie, without somebody going, oh, Star Wars, sure. There goes what was $10 became 50. So I said to George early on, I said, we need to come in like we're making another movie. And I thought, let's just pretend it's like making a horror movie. And I tried to come up with the most boring name that I could think of. And it was like Blue Harvest. And the whole idea behind the name Blue Harvest is it was supposed to uninspire you to ask, right? It wasn't like a horror movie like Eat Your Young. You know what I mean? There was nothing active about it. Nothing made it. It was to like pique your curiosity. We think of like Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Living. You know what I mean? There was nothing left. I said, no. Boring. It's like a harvest. That's boring. And the fact that, you're going to take that and you combine it with, it wasn't like Red Harvest or Blood Harvest. It was like Blue Harvest. It's like blue. It's like this passive color. You know what I mean? It was supposed to put you to sleep. And so that's where Blue Harvest came from. And the tagline was supposed to be ridiculous, horror beyond imagination. Like, who wrote that line? It's like so cliched. You know what I mean? It was just supposed to be dumb. And so that's where all of that came from, and it kind of worked for a while, until people started talking about Harrison and Carrie and Mark and R2 and C3PO and snow walkers and speeders and the Hutt. When we did it in Yuma and we did it, so it kind of worked. The other thing we were trying to do is that as Star Wars had become so popular, that there was a huge following of fans who were going through the trash cans at ILM and looking for stuff all the time. And we just wanted to make sure that nothing happened to attract any attention to that. So that's where all the Blue Harvest was. So, it worked for a while.
Well, speaking of titles, what do you remember as far as the title changing from Revenge to Return? And then
it was Revenge. And I said to George one day, and maybe other people said the same thing. And I said to him, I don't know if a Jedi would seek revenge. It's not part of the Jedi philosophy. And he went, doing my George imitation. Yeah, that's interesting. Now let me think about that. Within like a week or so, it changed to Return of the Jedi. Revenge is a better word for a movie, but it's not what the movie's about. It's really about the return of the Jedi. So it changed from, I still have Revenge of the Jedi t-shirts and sweatshirts and, but it changed from Revenge to Return. I guess other people must have said it too, because I remember reading something about it a while ago. But then there's a lot of not invented here stuff that happens in Hollywood. When you have a good idea, you sometimes find out years later that other people take credit for it.
You said you're doing a lot with the second unit. Was that George directing that?
No, it was David Tomlin directed that. And David was the first assistant director on Empire and then on Jedi. And he was a good second unit director, because when we were shooting the second unit up in the woods, the first unit was back at doing blue screen work. And because it was with the principals, George wanted to be with them. So he gave the second unit to David, who at that point was very well versed in the Star Wars universe, having worked on Empire and all of Jedi with Richard, and had also worked with some of the greatest directors in the world as well in his career. And he was sort of a really good choice, and had directed second unit before, because the second unit stuff was mostly action stuff with stuntmen and battle stuff and special effects. And because he had a good grasp of visual effects at that point, he stayed on to do that. And we were essentially shooting storyboard sequences, because all that stuff had all been storyboarded ahead of time. So we knew which pieces we were doing and when and what they looked like. And everything was sort of built to accommodate all that. David stayed on to do the second unit when we were up in the woods. And then sometimes we had like a third unit and I directed a few shots, like I did in Norway, little things like robots moving right to left or the whole second, anyway, little things.
I've always been so impressive as far as the way that the miniatures match with the rest of that, especially like the logs rolling and the ATSTs and all that. It looks so good.
The challenge was not so much matching the miniatures to the real, but matching the real to the miniatures. Because most of the stuff that you see is mostly model miniature stuff, either matted into shots or complete shots with just the miniatures in them. And, most of the time we did have a full-size chicken walker up there, but it didn't really move. It just, wasn't really practical to move it around, but you can kind of see it. But it was built and designed and created the great detail that the guys in the model shop and the stop motion guys did with Phil Tippett and John Berg and that whole stop motion group that did a lot of the snow walker and the little chicken walker type stuff. Or I'm not sure if that was the name that they finalized. I think.
How'd you even move that thing around?
With a crane. They would find a spot for it and, it came in pieces. They'd bring the pieces down and then get some crane down there or something small to kind of build it up again. They put scaffolding around it and just construct it. It didn't move too much when it was there. I think I recall in quite a few years, pretty limited and maybe what it could do. And it didn't always work the way you wanted it to. And it's like big stuff. Those are tough pieces to move around.
Sounds like a pretty arduous shoot, but did you have fun on it?
I don't know if I ever had fun shooting one of the movies because they're just so difficult and so complex. And there are so many pieces and so many elements that you need to keep in mind all the time of the way it's all being assembled and put together. I immensely enjoyed working with the people that I worked with. And I loved working with George because he's so brilliant as a filmmaker, and loved working with a lot of the English crew. I just love working with Norman Reynolds and working with Robert Watts because they were so professional and so much fun to make a movie with. I love my team of people who I put together. I was, back in those days, it was always very important to me because of how I grew up in movies to put good people together, to leave your personality at the door, people, and you were working on the movie together, and it's not about ego. It's about, doing what's right for the movie and making the good decisions. And you try to leave the ego, it's to put a group, considerate human beings together. Because I'd worked on a bunch of movies where people were not considerate and there were too many assholes around. And it just, making movies is hard enough without having to be surrounded by people like that. So it was always very important for me to put when people used to say this about the movies that I produced, it was just so nice. That was important to me. To hire key people would be good people. Life's too short. Making movies is hard enough to make a movie without having to work with dickheads, and so you try to avoid that kind of stuff whenever you can. So there were lots of people who enjoy their work, people who care about the work. People are mean and shitty and they don't care and they're just cheap. When somebody's faced with an opportunity of making a decision of, I can do this or I can do that. And if I do that, I'm helping them. And if I do this, it's fuck them. If you're not nice to them, they go, fuck them. I asked for this or I wanted to do that and they said no. It's like, fuck you. Go hang yourself. The old expression used to be, if they're going to hang themselves, don't stand on the rope. And you try. I never enjoyed that, so that if I went to somebody and I needed a favor or I wanted to do something, they would say, sure, okay, great. Because you try to create a team. You're putting a team of people together. You make a movie, you're like making this little army that's moving around from place to place and then, going here and invading there and setting up shop and coming in with the trucks and the people and all the blah, blah, blah. And, it's like there's, no room for assholes. I mean, that's the way I feel. And I don't like working with them and I don't want them around the movies that I worked on. It's just, it's kind of something I learned from working with George and Gary is that, that's not the way you do it. There's still life. As I got older, the other stuff you learn is that it's a movie. Life is life. Somebody has a family member who's dying, you sort of say, yeah, go take care of your family member for a few days. As opposed to say, well, we got the shot tomorrow morning. It's like, give me a break. Because I've seen too many unhappy people who live in divorced families because They had this attitude about the show must go on. Come on, guys, get real. It's not brain surgery, it's movie making. We'll figure out a way to do it. You don't want people getting hurt. You don't want people dying. You don't want to make stupid mistakes. It's not worth it. There's another way to figure it out. But I guess there are other people who don't agree with that philosophy. Directors should throw walkie-talkies. So, although I didn't work with too many, life's too short. It's like, it's hard enough. Let's try and enjoy it while we're doing it.
All right, we were back and we were talking about Return of the Jedi. And yeah, that's funny, Jamie. I had in my notes the dark times post Jedi, because we went for a lot of years with nothing. As Star Wars fans, it was, you had those 2 Ewok movies, you had the Droids cartoon, you had the Ewoks cartoon, but that was about it. There wasn't a whole lot going on. So yeah, you had like Bantha Tracks and then eventually Star Wars Insider as a magazine, but it was a really dry period for us.
The Christmas 84, it must have been. I got the Ewok Village and a few of the Ewoks figures, and I got the Rebel Troop Transport as well, I remember. And my sister got a Commodore 64, and I was like playing with my Ewoks, and I'm looking across at this Commodore 64, and I was ignoring my Ewoks, and I was going, I want one of those, and that's kind of when I gave up Star Wars. And my mum gave away all my stuff to this really annoying kid down the road. I'll never forgive her or him for that. And then I remember going to a toy shop that I used to visit to buy Star Wars figures. And I remember seeing those here. They were the tri-logo packs. They had the Spanish and the Italian and the English as well, like your Power of the Force era. And it had like the Barada figure and the Luke Stormtrooper figure and some of the more Ewoks and the Imperial Dignitary. You barely see him in Return of the Jedi. But I remember going, I want one of those. And my mum said, oh, you've grown out of that. And then there was a period in that same toy shop I remember passing where everything was being sold off for like 50p. And I still regret to this day, I still got this image of just like all of the toys just stacked up from all the different eras, Star Wars, Empire, Jedi.
Oh my God.
Could have bought all of them, And there was this period between 85 and maybe 91 where there was just nothing. I think you mentioned about Star Wars Insider, but the precursor to that was the Lucasfilm Fan Club magazine. Remember seeing that one day. The thing that really sparked it again for me was when I found Steve Sansweet's From Concept to Screen to Collectible. There was this gold and black book with Vader on it. We opened it up, my buddy and I, we were like 17 at the time or something like that. And it was all the figures. And we're like, I didn't know that one existed. I didn't, and we were starting to go around, what we call charity shops. You'd say thrift stores, I guess, and boot sales, table sales, just buying this stuff up. And that's when I kind of really got back into it all again. But I remember that period of like nothing. And I still hankered for more Star Wars. I wanted like an animated show with the further adventures of Luke and Han and Leia. I wanted more movies. I wanted more video games, And I guess there were some video games, TIE Fighter and X-Wing and all of that stuff on PC later on. But those times, they did seem like the dark times. There wasn't much about. And if you were still into Star Wars, it was like, really? Haven't you moved on? Turtles or Mask or something else? I don't know.
The Mask, yeah. One of those, or Masters of the Universe. No, but you're right. It was disappointing when you finally found out that Return was the last movie. So I think I brought it up when I was on a Dune episode with Mike. Like, that's how I got into Dune, was because it was supposed to be the next Star Wars. That's what the magazines at the time where everything was promoting it for. And there was toys and I'm like, oh, this is the next Dune, and I didn't see it in the theaters, but I rented it and dubbed it on, ripped it to the Betamax tape. And I'd watch it over and over again to like it because I thought it was going to be the next Star Wars. And of course, years later, I learned, of course, it was never going to be another Star Wars. It was so disappointing not having another Star Wars. And then, I just I don't remember the exact time I fell out of the toys. It was probably, I think I got into G.I. Joe after Star Wars because I was still really young. I was 10 when the movie came out, so I was still playing with all that shit in Masters of the Universe. But it was sad. And then it wasn't until the early 90s, or like I said, when I got into film schools, when I rediscovered Star Wars. again and can see it from a different eye, because I had roommates who were all smoking weed at the time. And you're watching it now in a different mind frame and rediscovering it and being like, oh shit, 'cause my friend has a Laserdisc player, my roommate, and you're like, dude, this is amazing.
Oh yeah, that definitive collection Laserdisc.
Oh yeah, I remember. My friend had it, and he called it the defective collection because it was like missing pieces, and the extras were really scant, and just like, oh yeah, like we were excited. We were thinking like, oh, the holiday special is going to be on here because that was such an important part of our lives growing up. And
do you know, I wasn't aware of the holiday special until I started to collect Star Wars stuff again, like in the early 90s. I remember being at a toy fair just down the road here, and this guy had a VHS, obviously bootleg. It's like, what is this? And it said, this fills in the gap between Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back. I was like, what? There's more? Like, I couldn't believe it, and I got home with like that same buddy of mine that we discovered Sweet's book with, and we put it in, and we were just like,
you poor guy. Oh my God.
What is happening? Have we just entered another dimension? I know, because it never got screened in the UK as far as I know. So it was completely off our radar. Never mentioned anywhere in any of the books I had. Have you seen the documentary about the holiday special?
Oh, A Disturbance in the Force? Yeah. It's fantastic.
Oh, I need to watch that. I saw it live when it was on as a kid. And for years, I thought I made it up or something. Because I remember we all gathered around and watched it. And I had a vague memory of it. And I didn't think it was real until like the internet and later on, when I just like, that was a real thing that we sat around and watched on TV one night.
In my head, that cartoon with Boba Fett was like a half an hour long. It was probably maybe like 5-10 minutes or something like that, but in my head,
it's the best thing in it, right?
Yeah, and I loved him riding the dragon, and he had that cool little spear thing, and just the voice characterization, like, that's right, friend. I loved that. I thought it was great.
Yeah, dude, he was so badass.
It was so ripe to be put in an animated world, Star Wars, and I just feel like, there was that fan a few years ago that did that kind of X-Wing or TIE fighter kind of battle or something in a kind of anime style. He was just a fan, just saying, Lucasfilm, give me some work. And that's some of the best stuff I've seen. And I would have loved that as a kid, just imagine that, like a weekly series of the further adventures of Droids was all right, but, it didn't kind of scratch that itch.
I'm sure had I been younger, that Clone Wars cartoon would have been right up my street. Or like, there was another one too, not Bad Batch, but there was another cartoon that was supposed to be really good.
Rebels?
Rebels, thank you. And I think that also would explain a lot of stuff that's going on in the Star Wars universe now that I'm not aware of. Because even as a kid, like I would hear these things and like they would start to build the expanded universe. Like I remember I was huge into the Marvel comic books, and I really liked the comic book that came out after Jedi, where it showed Boba Fett coming out of the Sarlacc pit because he was protected by his armor. And then he gets picked up by some Jawas, and then eventually, like, I think he is on top of a sandcrawler and it crashes over the side of a mountain. So he ends up dying again anyway, but you hear more about the Mandalorians and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. And then you see the way that they handled it in Book of Boba Fett, where it's just like, oi, I got rescued out of that thing. I want to be friends with everybody. Oh, you need a job? And it's just like, what the fuck is this show? This is awful.
Did you know, the only thing I liked about that show was that we were back there. We were back in Jabba's palace, and I could look at it again for an angle. That was the only aspect I liked of it. Shame.
He's like Han out of the carbonite, man. You change.
Yeah,
guess.
Every episode had him going in that Bacta tank for, half the episode and flashing back to the sand people. And I'm just like, oh, these poor sand people, they're going to, they got massacred by Anakin. They're probably still talking about it today.
I did actually like that show, unfortunately.
I liked the 2 Mandalorian episodes that they snuck into Book of Boba Fett.
Phenomenal.
They were great, yeah.
Those are good.
Phenomenal. Yeah,
better
really
than the
good.
3rd season of The Mandalorian, where it was just like the whole Katie Sackhoff thing. I was like, I'm getting ready to be done with this show, guys. This was originally so great. As soon as they brought Luke in, I was like, oh, please don't bring in Luke. I don't need this to be tied to the Skywalker family anymore.
This is why I loved Andor so much, though, because it didn't need to be Star Wars ultimately. And it's really well written. The sets are amazing. The performances are amazing. It's got a great soundtrack. It's got nods to films that we've all discovered after we fell in love with Star Wars. I thought that was great. And, I've said to friends of mine who go, Star Wars, never seen one. I don't know why they're my friends, but I've said to them, this is the series for you, because you can watch this and you don't really have to know anything about Jedis or Jawas or anything. You can just go in and see it for what it is, which is a great bit of TV. I think those other series, they just tried so hard to kind of connect dots in the same way that the prequels did. It's like, oh, look, there's a big arrow here to say, P.O. was built by Anakin. It's like, what?
I was so disappointed by the Obi-Wan show because of the Leia thing. Because for years they were talking about there was going to be an Obi-Wan movie. And I was so excited because I thought Ewan McGregor was perfect casting and him getting older to play Obi-Wan. I was so hyped. But then that TV show, it puts Princess Leia. And it's like, why? We don't need that. Why can't we just have that Seven Samurai adventure?
And Luke was in there as well, wasn't he? At the homestead. I think there's a little Luke. And the best bit about that show for me was when they have that fight. It wasn't a fight itself. It was that moment where he's half Anakin, half Vader, and the voice keeps changing. Yes. I was like, that should have been in the prequels. That is what we all wanted to see.
Well, that's the problem with the prequels for me. I like the prequels, except I don't like the Phantom Menace. I think the Phantom Menace, him being a kid throughout the whole Phantom Menace, really rushes the character development in the two other movies. That's the one I'm not a big fan of. I like Darth Maul and I love the pod race. There's sequences in Phantom Menace I like, but I like episode 2 and 3 way more. But the things I liked about the prequels was, at least compared to the later sequels, trilogy, at least everything was different in the prequels. We were seeing things we hadn't seen before, spacecraft and villains and set pieces that were original versus the new trilogy we got, which was, we have to now go back to the original Star Wars and show you all the cool things you liked in that again, versus we got to see new machinery and we'd never seen a pod race, or we never seen a lot of that stuff before. That's why I liked the prequels, but episode 1 bummed me out because I thought it wasted Anakin as a kid too much. I always kind of wish it was like Goodfellas, where we had him as a kid for 20, 30 minutes, and then we got to see him gradually grow up. But that would make it a completely different movie.
The second movie feels like such a waste to me. It feels Attack of the Clones. It feels like a detective movie that I just don't care about, where it's...
You don't get it. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, well, Obi-Wan's trying to figure out who's building these clones, who's ordering these clones. There's this whole thing about, Darth Sidious, and then Darth, who is that Christopher Lee played?
Count Dooku.
Count Dooku. Yeah. But he also has a Darth name. He might be Darth Tyrannus or something. I don't know.
Count Dooku Killer.
The rush to make him Darth Vader in the last 5 minutes, I was like, no. Like the whole third movie should be him as Darth Vader. The second movie should be the fall from grace. And it just, like, all the rules of like, Jedis can't get married. I'm like, what is happening here? Like, why is this the conflict? And appreciate your opinion, Stephen. I just have nothing good to say about those prequels whatsoever.
Dude, it's all good, Chris. For years that I get a lot of anger toward me for defending them. People hate me for defending them, but it was just like, I just like that they were different, and I had a great time. Except Phantom Menace, I'm not the biggest fan. I do love the duel in Phantom Menace. Like, there's so many things in Phantom Menace I like it, but it just I can't handle him as a kid being a fighter pilot and doing all that. It feels like he should have been a teenager at that point of the movie doing that. But him being still that young, I'm not going to buy his relationship with Natalie Portman in this second.
Are you an angel?
Imagine Return of the Jedi didn't exist, right? And all of those series, let's say the prequels, then the series, and then the sequels. Imagine their jumping off point was The Empire Strikes Back. Because if you think about it, a lot of those shows and those prequels and those sequels, aesthetically and tone-wise, they are more Return of the Jedi than they are Empire or Star Wars. I think, as much as I love some of those environments that we talked about, Jabba's Palace, Return of the Jedi, I think that, we really needed to get away from all of that stuff and that aesthetic. I'd love it if it went down that path that the Empire was on, and Luke had really turned to the dark side and a few people had got killed off. And imagine what we'd be having now. Maybe we wouldn't have had to wait all these years to have Andor, which, deals with some pretty grown-up topics. And for this it's for our generation, right? That show is not for anyone else. It's not for the kids who liked Rebels or even the prequel guys potentially. But Yeah, I just thought aesthetically they do match Return of the Jedi more than they match anything else.
It's so fitting for 2025. Just this whole idea of this push towards fascism and stuff. And it's so funny because, of course, I had to think about Trump while I was watching this and thinking he probably wants to be the emperor, but at best he's Jabba the Hutt. This whole thing of who's going to pay me the most kind of thing and bargaining with Bush and all this stuff. Where you get to the emperor scenes and you're just like, no, this guy knows what he's doing. He's got everything taken care of. His fatal flaw is that he doesn't think that Vader will ever turn, and he thinks that those people down on the surface of the planet of the fourth moon of Endor are going to succeed. I do like there's a deleted scene where the Emperor orders them to fire on the moon and basically wipe out everybody, like take out that whole thing, including all of the Imperial people that are down there. And you have this whole thing of Gerard like having conflicting feelings and stuff. And poor Gerard, he's just completely eliminated from the film other than like one scene where it's just like, oh yeah, I need more people. I can't build this that fast. And it's like, okay, yeah, you're on every project that I've ever been on my life during my normal 9 to 5. Not enough time, not enough resources, but yet you want perfection. Okay, great.
I interviewed the editor of Return of the Jedi, who was Mark I's editor, a guy called Sean Bartley, who lives in West London. And I went to his house for the morning and we chatted about it. And he was talking about that early cut he did that was quite plodding. I think the film was like 2 hours, 40 minutes or something like that. But it had all of those scenes in. It had those scenes with the guys gunning on the Falcon, dressed in their kind of, camouflage fatigues and stuff. And more of them going down onto Endor. You see the guys all sitting behind them. I think there's a couple of shots back there. And, he said, I actually really liked that version. He said, because it made more sense. He then didn't say much more about it. I really wanted to kind of probe him to see if he had like a VHS knockoff of it somewhere. But what he did show me was the splicer that he cut the film with. It went up to this little office upstairs and there it was, the little splicer. And he said, oh, I've got probably half a dozen Revenge of the Jedi t-shirts knocking around somewhere.
Oh my God, right.
Shall we, should we go in the loft now?
And God, yeah, they changed that title so late. I mean, there was a movie theater I used to go to around here that still had a Revenge of the Jedi poster in the marquee, in the lobby. And I was just like, oh, yeah, like that would have been something. And yeah, just this whole like Jedi don't take revenge thing. I was like, okay, I guess I can see that. But at the same time, Return is such a weak title.
No, you're right. But it fits the movie because it's such a nice movie.
It was going to be Return originally as well.
It doesn't deserve the title Revenge of the Jedi because it makes it sound too, it's a nice movie. So it has to be Return. And we got Revenge for the third Star Wars, which is a rougher movie.
And I love how many people take responsibility for that change as well. Like I've spoken to Jim Bloom. I haven't heard your interview with Jim, but he says, he remembers talking about it. And Howard Kazanjian says that he came up with it. And George said it was his idea, And I work on big TV shows and big sports events. I can't remember who made a decision in the thick of it. Sometimes I'm sure things I've claimed that I've done were not my idea originally. It was just a little spark of an idea that somebody else gave me and I ran with it. I remember that I had there was a cinema near us that had that poster up for a little while as well. And I remember when I went to see it, I was like, I thought it was this other movie. And I can imagine those people who were at that kind of sweet spot age for Empire going into Jedi and seeing the word revenge and thinking, oh, this is going to be one hell of a thing. This is going to be for us. I'm now 15 or 16 or whatever they would have been then. And then they got this kind of fluffy little jolly all wrapped up in a bundle movie.
And also Jedi is not, I can't remember the term for this, but it's both a plural and a singular noun. So it's like, is it more than one Jedi? Is it the Jedi?
They're coming back. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Like they've been passed out before and we don't know, like, we know that Yoda's around. We knew that Ben was around. Like, how many other Jedi are there? So it feels very weird when it's like, no, Luke's the last one. I'm like, I'm sure there are other Jedi that are out there someplace. And I was really hoping, like, no, this is like at the final hour, all of these Jedi are going to show up and be like, we're here to help you in your fight. We're here to help take down the Death Star and Vader and the Emperor once and for all. And I got to say, as a kid, man, when they unmasked Vader, it was one of the most disappointing things in my entire life.
Is that you?
Yeah. After seeing the back of his head in the second movie, I was like, oh my God, this guy's going to be so fucked up. And then it's, Grandpa, what are you doing here? Sebastian Shaw having those big bushy eyebrows. I was like, oh my God.
Because that's the important thing. But no, they removed the eyebrows because the eyebrows should have been gone. Yeah. Yeah, that unveiling, I think, for a lot of people, including David Prowse, was a disappointment. You did want to see somebody a bit more messed up. But I think for years, I was a bit scared of that scene in Empire where you saw the back of his head. And what I do, or what I did, I probably still do to a certain extent, is if I'm scared of something, I just sort of turn it into something else. And I remember as a kid thinking it looked like raspberry ripple ice cream that you could buy here in the UK. I don't know if that was a thing in the States. It was like vanilla ice cream with like this ripple thread of raspberry, and you get a little taste, a little hit of raspberry. And that's what it looked like. It looked like a scoop of that on Vader's head. So for years, I was scared about seeing what was on the other side. And when it happened, my cousin was next to me and we were sort of like getting a little bit closer and just thinking, what's going to happen here? And then we both went, oh, that's what it is. It's just an old dude.
And I guess we did see the Emperor in the second movie as well. And he had those cool, it was like chimpanzee
monkey
eyes.
Yeah.
And then you could see him in person. You're just like, oh, okay. Back and changed it yet.
Luke had just taken the mask off. And imagine if you'd just taken the mask off and we just saw Luke's face just kind of go. Or maybe he looked just like Luke, like the dream sequence in Empire. Maybe it's like an old version of Luke. God, there's so much potential with that sequence. Yeah, it feels like a lost opportunity.
And then the poor guy just dies. And the death of Yoda and the death of Darth Vader, they do nothing for me. There's no feeling. I'm just like, okay, poor cross-eyed Yoda just faded away. Who's one of my favorite characters in the second movie. They give him such short shrift in this film, then he just disappears. And then, we build up to Darth Vader, and then you go, oh, he's just a harmless old man. He's basically the wizard from The Wizard of Oz. You're just like, he's the guy who's pulling the levers and everything. And you're just like, how is this guy such a threat for the last two films? And now you see what a weak old man he was.
You weren't off completely when you were talking about like the return of the Jedi being Jedis. I have a podcast, Best Movies Never Made, and we had J.W. Rinsler, one of the nicest human beings I've ever met. So kind. And he was telling us that the original version of Jedi, during the ending, when Luke is wanted with the Emperor, that the ghosts of Obi-Wan and Yoda come back and help. They're like help defending him against the lightning and everything, And then the very ending is that they become human again. So in a way, that title, the way you were thinking about it, there was a version of it where it was Returns of the Jedi. In a way, when you were saying that, it reminded me of, have you seen tweet? This could have been going on for years, but I've just been seeing it recently nonstop. Someone saying, I just realized after 17 years of watching Star Wars, the title Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, refers to Darth Vader's return as Anakin and not Luke. I don't think that's what Lucas intended, but I find it interesting because in a way it could make sense.
It wasn't until later years that ever occurred to me, and I don't know if it was something online that sparked that, but yeah, there's that sort of duality. Luke's decided he's not going to go to the dark side. He throws his lightsaber away. The Jedi have returned. He's now become a Jedi. This is him reaching that kind of peak. And simultaneously, there's, Anakin saving his son and getting rid of the baddest guy in the universe and chucking him down the vent. So yeah, it could be read like that, but I don't think anyone talked about that at the time. Maybe for 25, 30 years, yeah.
All the information you guys gave me, I didn't see that once, but I think that it is fascinating. I saw that tweet recently in the last few weeks getting ready for this show. It's just been popping up everywhere all of a sudden. I'm like, oh, weird. And by the way, I don't know how Darth getting split in half going down one of those things like the Emperor. How do they always survive that?
Somehow Palpatine returned.
Well, even Luke's lightsaber apparently survived that as well, because that little orange creature was like, oh, here's Luke's lightsaber. And I'm like, this is the blue one? This isn't the green one? Okay.
And what was it like? That's a story for another time.
Yeah, that
not
we'll
in
never
any of the
hear.
sequels.
I do like the person who gives the TED Talk, quote unquote, about how all the Star Wars movies have the wrong titles.
What happens in episode 1? We meet Anakin Skywalker, the rise of Skywalker. Years later, we find out that Palpatine, leader of the Sith, have ordered an army to destroy the Jedi. Revenge of the Sith. In episode 3, Order 66 happens and the clones attack. Attack of the Clones. In episode 4, Obi-Wan teaches Luke that it's time for the Jedi to return. Return of the Jedi. In episode 5, Yoda teaches Luke how to use the Force. The Force awakens. In episode 6, both Yoda and Anakin die, which makes Luke the last Jedi. After the Empire is destroyed, a new Empire comes. The Empire strikes back. Come on, guys. In episode 8, Luke trains Rey and then sacrifices himself to give the Resistance a new hope. Finally, in episode 9, Palpatine returns from the dead, making him the Phantom Menace. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Lucasfilm, hire me, please.
Oh, I never thought of that. Yeah, someone did that with the Last Apes trilogy also, that all the titles are wrong for those, because I'm completely confused what movie is which now.
Jesus, yeah. Well, I'm confused by the sequel trilogy because I'm just like, which one's Force Awakens? Which one's Last? I just know that I don't like any of those. I'm not like some sort of misogynist where I'm just like, I can't handle Daisy Ridley in this role. I just felt
She's
like
great,
they were,
but
yeah.
No, I like her a lot too.
I really wish that she had joined forces with Kylo Ren. Like that moment that I think we all talked about, had she gone with him, it would have set the whole trilogy in a way better place and shown that conflict. Because instead, a good character starts good and ends good and is good all the way through, as opposed to somebody who actually has a moment of doubt and then redeems themselves.
Complication, yeah.
Yeah. And Ben could have been that, but he wasn't.
But you see those posts online, how come this happens and then that happens and then this didn't happen? And the answer is always bad writing. It's never about some expositional thing or character thing. It's just somebody didn't think about it at the time and they just forgot what they had in some cases. I'm able to sort of compartmentalize those films as sequels as maybe somebody has a go at rebooting Star Wars and this is the result. I don't have to hold them as some sort of canon. I'm not part of a religion, as a lot of people seem to think it is the case. But I experienced those films, particularly that first one, The Force Awakens, through my daughters who were quite young at the time. How old's that film now? Yeah, I just remember them kind of, skipping down the high street here where I live and wanting to go to the Disney store and buy an action figure. And I thought that was great. I thought fantastic. This is their Star Wars. And I lived, the first time I saw it, I was with my cynical 40-year-old mates. Okay, so we're talking...
Wow, 10 years ago.
Yeah, I'm 50 next year, so blimey. And I remember us all coming out just going, lot to process, I'm just trying to find a way to like it. And then that second one I didn't get on with at all. And the third one I kind of just gave up on. Yeah, well, I was really pleased that my kids enjoyed it. And again, like you see another generation of people into it. And, I went to Star Wars Celebration here in London a couple of years ago. I did a panel about Andor, about the visual effects in Andor for ILM. And what was fantastic about that was just seeing all the different generations of people and all the different cosplays, the effort that people put in and the love they have for these tiny little moments in the films. Like one guy, one of the best costumes I saw, he was Obi-Wan, but as a ghost. So he had this blue neck curtain kind of stitched all the way around him and he appeared to glow as he was walking along. And that's just like, it's like 2 minutes in one of the movies. But yeah, I love that about Star Wars, that there's so much of it now that so many people can find what they love within it. And I've never been one of those people who wants to defend or argue, a particular point in the movie. Just, if you love it, great. If you don't, just go and watch something else.
I hear you. I like a lot of movies people can't understand why I like, but that's why I'll never argue with people. Like when The Acolyte came out, everyone's ripping it apart. I just kept my opinions to myself, It's like I don't want to go on there and rip things apart, but I do wish they would have went with the Duel of Fates draft instead of Rise of Skywalker. I just thought that was a more fitting finale to that trilogy. There was just this great, I don't know, it was like Rey with this dual lightsaber fighting Kylo Ren with his crossguard lightsaber. It just seemed like such a visual in my head for the poster, and just, I don't know, man, instead of, Kylo Ren turn into a good guy, and then just, I don't know, I found that movie to be kind of a mess. Maybe years from now when I return to it, I'll appreciate it, because that happens with me with certain, if I don't like something now, years later, I could go and appreciate it. But them getting rid of that draft, I just always felt like, I don't know why they did. I thought it was really cool, but because they fired the director who wrote it, now they had to get rid of, I thought, a really good story. And then instead we got the warps chase. That movie is really cool, but that's all I remember. I just watched it once and I was just kind of like, bummed out by it. And then especially years later, getting my hands on that draft. And then I read it and I'm like, oh my God, this is great.
Oh, I have to get hold of that. You just brought up a good point there, though, that there are movies you watch and you dislike them, and years later you fall in love with them. You know, for me, I guess Blade Runner would be a good example of that. But I think that's what's unique about these 3 original Star Wars films is I've loved them in every phase of my life. You know, since I first saw them through my teens and my 20s and my 30s. Now I'm in my late 40s and I still love those movies. And still, I probably don't watch them once a year anymore like I used to, a few times a year. I don't think I've seen Star Wars for a good 3 or 4 years now. So the screening next week, or this week's going to be very good. But I've always found something to like about them through all the phases of my life. And that's pretty unique. And I think it is really bloody hard to make these movies and make a good one of these movies. You know, all the tools have been there in the past and it has not been achieved. And it just goes to show what a miracle Andor is and what a miracle Empire Strikes Back is. And the original Star Wars is, you know, you think of the confluence of all those things that had to come together, all those artists, the timing, the political landscape at the time, the need to want to have something that was fresh and new and exciting and different. You know, it's pretty amazing that it happened. And hey, we happened to be on Earth at the time they were released. Isn't that pretty amazing? We were here for Star Wars, David Bowie, the Rolling Stones, you know, it's kind of crazy, really.
Indiana Jones, you know, just so much cool stuff growing up with and experiencing for the first time, you know.
One of my shout out to Waz. He is a hypnotherapist, right? He used to be an editor. And he recently got a message from somebody to ask if you can hypnotize me to make me forget Star Wars because I want to see it again for the first time. And he said, give it a go. I won't pass any judgment on that, but I do love that idea of just being able to have your memory wiped to re-experience Star Wars all over again. But then you'd have to wipe so much else, wouldn't you? All the things that reference it over the years and lean into it. Wouldn't that be great to watch it again for the first time?
When we talked about A New Hope, one of my co-hosts for that was Rob St. Mary, who really hadn't watched Star Wars. And so it was very new for him. And he just knew so much of it from the culture, like you were saying, like all of the references. Like, I'm surprised that we have gone for almost 2 hours. We haven't done like every other group of men talking about Return of the Jedi and just drooled about Princess Leia and the slave girl outfit. I'm very proud of us because like that comes back all the time. I mean, even that friends with their fetish for that thing. And I'm just like, oh, yeah. But like, yeah, that's a major part of the culture as well. Like now you see when you go to like the Star Wars conventions and stuff, how many women are dressed up like Princess Leia in her slave garb. You know, it's pretty phenomenal.
You know, I think that's another example of what we were talking about earlier, where it doesn't fit the character. You think about Empire and she's feisty and she's fighting back. Okay, she's falling in love with Han Solo and, you know, he's been taken off and I love you, I know, and all of that stuff. But to see her just sat there in front of Jabba, just not saying or doing anything, you just think, where is the fire? Where's the fire gone? What has happened in the interim here? Yeah, I'm sure it was a sexual awakening for a lot of young men and women. But it's the thing that feels the most out of place to me, I think, in the whole of that trilogy.
Yeah, because she was supposed to be doing something else, and it makes sense now. She's not really doing much there. And also, like, no one's, like, paying it, you know, like, Luke doesn't even pay her no mind. It's like, yo, what do you do? No, he's just stoic and doing his thing.
And Han says, where's Leia? And she goes, I'm here. And that's it. That's all we get. You know, obviously she does strangle him in the end. And that is a great moment that she gets to do that. And Carrie would talk about that in interviews. You know, she hated, well, she loved Jabba, but she hated what did she call it? The mung in the corner of his mouth. And that she got to strangle him in the end was great. But yeah, it's a difficult topic, isn't it? Because so much has changed since then. And I can kind of see what they're harkening back to, the whole kind of Arabian kind of look and the Flash Gordon thing. And I mean, Nilo Rodis Jamira designed that costume. And I think George initially said, no way, we can't do that. And he kept sort of pushing George all the time with these ideas. And eventually he kind of went for it. And then I think he almost regrets it, you know. And I think it was Kenner, wasn't it, said they were never going to make an action figure of her like that. And
oh, I didn't know that.
And 2 years later, Hasbro did one. But it's the bit that, if, you know, I've got 3 daughters. If I'm watching that movie, they said to me, I think it was about 5 years ago, they said, oh, it's your birthday today. What movie do you want to watch? I said, oh, let's watch Return of the Jedi. It's probably the most family friendly of the 3, you know. And we're watching, and that bit came on, and I'm looking at my three girls, who at the time, two of them are developing into young women, and I did feel a bit shitty. Maybe that's a fan edit that needs to be done.
They covered up Daryl Hannah's butt in Splash. I'm surprised they haven't done the same thing for Return of the Jedi.
They,
Oh, yeah. Digitally made her hair longer, and it looks awful. Whoever did the special effects for it did not know what they were doing. It looks like she's wearing a pair of panties made out of fur.
In defense of VFX artists, they probably did know what they were doing. They just didn't have the time or the money to do it, yeah.
All right, guys, let's take another break, and we're going to play a preview for next week's show right after these brief messages.
After all these years, I thought I knew you, but you turned out to be a stranger.
We are fighting for our lives, Anne. My family must survive.
Yes, the most shocking experience of their lives. Doubly shocking because it can happen to you.
Stay away from that trailer.
What are you going to do? Call the cops? They're busy with the new highway patrol.
Now, Rick!
The lawless are on the loose, making it necessary for law-abiding citizens to make their own law.
When I get going, fire a shot over their heads. Maybe that'll upset them.
Right.
There are no civilians. We are all at war.
Give me a gun. I'm good with a gun. I'll stay here and I'll kill them.
This is civilization's jungle, after the jackals of society have ruthlessly ravaged it, ending the world of decency.
Killed two men.
I tried to kill them too, but I missed. I just wasn't a good enough shot.
That's right. We'll be back next week with a look at Panic in the Year Zero. Until then, I want to thank my co-hosts, Stephen and Jamie. So, Jamie, what's the latest with you, sir?
Still doing the podcast, the Filmumentaries podcast. I'm just in the process of editing episode 128. And funnily enough, it's an episode that I'm just trying to throw out there at the moment because I'm so busy. It's an interview from 10 years ago with Anthony Forrest, who played not only the deleted Fixer, who was one of Luke's friends at Toshi Station from the original film, but he also played the Move Along Stormtrooper. And there's some great stories about him traveling out to Tunisia and getting drunk on champagne with Mark Hamill on the way back and sticking stickers all over a sleeping Alec Guinness, I think he talks about at one point. So yeah, still doing the podcast and working on this Joe Alves, Jaws production designer, Countless production designer, lots of stories from Joe we've been compiling over the last few years. We're out to Martha's Vineyard next week to shoot more of that. Thanks to the GoFundMe that I started. If anybody's listening and wants to help us, then the GoFundMe is still active. If you look for Not Your Average Joe or Jamie Benning and GoFundMe, you'll find it. I just keep chipping away at things that I love to do. So yeah, you can find me as Filmumentaries pretty much everywhere online. Also, my Return of the Jedi unauthorized timeline book, which you mentioned earlier on, is still available. Myself and Justin Berger released that for the 40th anniversary. So it chronicles the film, as it says, from 76 to 2023, because, you know, that's the first time Jabba the Hutt is talked about. And we go through the whole process, sort of listing out all of the dates and everything that happened on those dates. And this is information you can find in Rinsler's book and in some of the other books as well. But, you know, shown in this format, it's quite interesting that you'll see like, oh, there was an Ewok costume test on the day that the sandstorm scene was shot. And, you know, you see the film in a kind of different light, and then all the way through production, post-production, all the way up to its anniversary. So that's available on Amazon pretty much everywhere you can get Amazon. Like, here's an example. We recreated a load of call sheets as well. Some of the pages are just like call sheets listing out who was on set that day. What's the date today? Hang on. 8th of June, right? Let's have a look. So here we are in June. Is there an entry for the 8th? There's one for the 9th. Oh, there we go. There's one for the 7th. The Hollywood Reporter announces Jedi earned $70 million in 12 days. That was June 7th, 1983. If we go back to 82 June, there's probably one during production here. So the 9th of June, the Jedi creature shop schedule on those days had Tony and Randy Skin Rancor, whatever that means. And then like I put a couple of bits of my interviews in there. I've got diaries of the guys that worked on Jabba that have never been seen before. They're not like deep diaries, but, you know, Dave Barkley says like, here it is. So there's these entries from Dave. That's a shot at Madame Tussauds of Dave and the Jabba there. But it says, first day at Elstree, arrive at 8 a.m., creature finger extensions in Stuart's lab and check out Jabba. Toby and I get inside. It's okay. And we meet with Robert, Watson, Doug. And, you know, just little bits that you wouldn't have known about before because everyone's got a story, right? But yeah, it's like you can get the paperback version for like $20 on Amazon.
Fantastic. And Stephen, how about yourself?
Yeah, I do a podcast called Best Movies Never Made. Right now, I guess when this episode comes out, nearing towards the end of an epic, going through all the unmade Superman movies. We just did the Mario Puzo draft, and then we did the original version of Superman 3, and then we're going to be doing Lives and Reborn, and
I wrote a huge article about that years ago, and yeah, it took me forever to track down some of those scripts. Holy shit.
Yeah, dude, it's massive because I do all the outlines, and oh my God, yeah. We thought our Batman episode was the longest. I think this is gonna beat it. So you can check that out. And I want to see more shark content. I know Jaws 50th documentary is coming out. I got it on Shudder, Sharksploitation. And I'm excited for Jamie's documentary on Joe Alves because there's so many things. We couldn't really get into Joe Alves a lot in the documentary because we have to touch on Jaws, but we have hundreds of other shark movies to get to. But one of my favorite things about Joe Alves is when you watch the opening of Jaws, when they're running by those fences in the beginning, like that's all Joe production design. He puts those fences up. You know, the dude's freaking amazing. So I can't wait to see Jamie's documentary because I just love Joe Alves. And there's so much I don't think people appreciate or even know about the guy. But yeah, if you want to see a cool shark documentary about shark movies, check out Sharksploitation on Shudder. And just the podcast in that at the moment. I'm working on something new, but I don't think I can announce it yet. Hopefully going to be finishing this summer. But yeah, you can follow the podcast on Twitter and Blue Sky now and Instagram and all that to see concept art from all the movies we talk about.
Well, thank you again, guys, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. If you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on. They are all available at weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projectionbooth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the galaxy.